Fermi Paradox. The universe is vast, so vast that it contains hundreds of billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars, many of which have planets orbiting them. Given the sheer numbers, it seems almost certain that intelligent life must exist somewhere else in the cosmos. And yet, despite decades of searching, we've found no evidence of aliens, no signals, no spacecraft, no traces of advanced civilizations. This puzzling contradiction is the Fermi Paradox, one of the most intriguing questions humanity has ever faced. If the universe is so big, where is everyone? The paradox gets its name from physicist Enrico Fermi, who casually asked this question during a lunch conversation in 1950. The math seems to demand that intelligent life should be out there. With so many stars and planets, even if life arises on only a tiny fraction of them, there should still be millions, if not billions, of civilizations in our galaxy alone. And if even a small number of these civilizations are capable of interstellar travel, they should have spread across the galaxy by now. So why haven't we seen any evidence? One explanation is that intelligent civilizations might be exceedingly rare. While the ingredients for life, water, carbon, energy, are abundant, the leap from simple molecules to complex organisms and then to intelligent beings may be so unlikely that it has only happened here on Earth. In this view, humanity might be a cosmic fluke, the result of an extraordinarily improbable sequence of events. Another possibility is that intelligent civilizations do exist, but they're too far away for us to detect. The scale of the universe is almost incomprehensible. Even at the speed of light, it would take over 100,000 years to cross our galaxy. If alien civilizations are scattered across such immense distances, their signals, if they're sending any, may not have reached us yet, or we may not yet have the technology to detect them. But what if alien civilizations are nearby and we still don't see them? This leads to another possibility. They might not want to be found. Just as humans are careful about revealing their location in the wild, perhaps advanced civilizations are deliberately keeping quiet, either out of fear of attracting hostile attention or out of a philosophical belief in non-interference. This is sometimes called the zoo hypothesis, the idea that Earth is like an exhibit in a cosmic zoo, observed but left undisturbed. There's also the unsettling possibility that civilizations self-destruct, rushed before they can make meaningful contact. Advanced technology brings incredible power, but also enormous risks, from nuclear weapons to environmental collapse to artificial intelligence. If intelligent life tends to destroy itself shortly after reaching technological maturity, the galaxy might be littered with the ruins of once thriving civilizations. Another explanation involves the limits of our own perception. What if alien life exists but is so different from us that we don't recognize it? We tend to imagine aliens as humanoid beings or civilizations that communicate using radio signals, but life elsewhere could be fundamentally unlike anything we've ever conceived. It might exist in forms we can't detect or in dimensions we can't perceive. They might even be here, but we simply lack the ability to notice them. The Fermi Paradox forces us to confront not only the vastness of the universe, but also the fragility of our assumptions. It's easy to imagine ourselves as the center of the story, but the universe is under no obligation to conform to our expectations. Whether intelligent life is rare, distant, hidden, or extinct, each explanation challenges how we see ourselves and our place in the cosmos. Some thinkers suggest the paradox has a more mundane resolution. Perhaps we simply haven't been looking for long enough or in the right ways. Modern technology has only allowed us to scan for extraterrestrial signals for a few decades, a blink of an eye on cosmic timescales. The search for intelligent life may require centuries of effort before yielding results. In this view, the Fermi Paradox isn't a mystery. It's a reminder to be patient. Others take an even more radical approach, suggesting that the absence of evidence may itself be evidence of something profound. If the universe appears silent and empty, perhaps it's trying to tell us something about the nature of life, intelligence, or the laws of physics. Some theories propose that the very conditions needed to support life might make it inherently rare or fleeting, a fleeting spark in an otherwise indifferent cosmos. The Fermi Paradox doesn't just ask where the aliens are, it asks what their absence means for us. If we are truly alone, it places an extraordinary responsibility on humanity. It means that the future of intelligent life in the universe rests entirely on our shoulders. It challenges us to take better care of our planet, to protect and preserve the fragile conditions that make life possible, and to think deeply about how we might one day represent ourselves to the cosmos. Ultimately, the Fermi Paradox remains unresolved, and that's what makes it so compelling. It invites us to ask the biggest questions about existence, from the origins of life to the fate of civilizations. And while the answers may be elusive, the search itself has the power to unite us, not just as a species, but as beings capable of curiosity, imagination, and hope. Ship of Theseus. If you replaced every part of a ship over time, its planks, its sails, its wheel, until none of the original parts remained, would it still be the same ship? This question, known as the Ship of Theseus, is one of the most enduring and puzzling paradoxes of all time. It doesn't just challenge how we think about objects, it forces us to question the very nature of identity itself. What makes something what it is? Is it the material it's made of, the way it's put together, or something more abstract? Imagine a ship docked in a harbor. Over the years, parts of it begin to rot and wear out. First, the crew replaces a few planks, then a mast, then another plank, until eventually every single piece of the ship has been replaced. It still sails the seas, carries its crew, and looks like the same ship. But is it? And if it isn't, when did it stop being the Ship of Theseus? Was it after one plank was replaced, or 10, or all of them? Now, let's complicate the question even further. Suppose someone gathers all the old, discarded pieces of the original ship and uses them to reconstruct it elsewhere. Which is now the true Ship of Theseus? The one rebuilt from its original parts, or the one that has been continuously maintained and updated? Or are they both, in some strange way, the same ship? This paradox doesn't offer easy answers. It leaves us tangled in questions about what identity truly means. The Ship of Theseus isn't just a thought experiment about ships. It's a metaphor for everything in life that changes over time. Think about yourself. The cells in your body are constantly dying and regenerating. By the time you've lived a few decades, most of the cells you were born with have been replaced. Are you still the same person? If so, what makes you, you? Is it your memories, your personality, or something deeper and less tangible? The paradox also forces us to consider the nature of objects around us. If you own an old car and gradually replace every part, is it still the same car? Created with time to buy room. The Ship of Theseus reveals that our concept of identity is far more fluid than we often realize. It shows that the things we think of as fixed and permanent are actually in a constant state of change. Philosophers have grappled with this question for centuries. Some argue that identity is tied to continuity of function or purpose. For the Ship of Theseus, this would mean that as long as the ship continues to sail and fulfill its role, it remains the same ship, regardless of the materials it's made of. Others suggest that identity is tied to the material itself, that the reconstructed ship made from the original parts is the true Ship of Theseus because it retains the original substance. There's also a third perspective, which challenges the idea that identity is a single, fixed thing at all. This view suggests that the Ship of Theseus isn't one ship or the other, it's both. Identity in this sense isn't a matter of either or, but both and. It evolves and adapts, shaped by context and perception. In a way, the Ship of Theseus forces us to confront the idea that the boundaries we draw around identity, whether for ships, objects, or ourselves, are largely artificial. The paradox also has profound implications for how we think about personal growth and change. As individuals, we are constantly evolving. Our beliefs, values, and experiences shape us over time, often in ways we don't fully recognize. If you look back at who you were 5, 10, or 20 years ago, you might feel like you're a completely different person. But are you? Or are you, like the Ship of Theseus, a continuation of the same essence, carried forward through time and transformation? This paradox even extends to how we think about societies. cultures, and traditions. A city may replace its buildings, roads, and infrastructure over centuries, but it still feels like the same place. Languages evolve, losing old words and gaining new ones, yet they remain recognizable. Traditions are passed down and adapted, but they retain a sense of continuity. The ship of Theseus reminds us that identity is not about holding on to the past. It's about navigating change while preserving a sense of connection to what came before. So how do we resolve the ship of Theseus? The truth is, we don't. Like all great paradoxes, it doesn't have a definitive answer. Instead, it challenges us to think about identity in ways that are richer and more nuanced. It shows us that change doesn't erase what was. It builds on it. Whether it's a ship, a car, a city, or a person, identity is not something static or absolute. It's a process, a journey, and a story we tell ourselves. The ship of Theseus teaches us that even as we change, something essential remains. What that something is might differ depending on how we view the world, but the paradox reminds us that identity isn't a simple equation. It's a dance between the old and the new, the past and the future, the parts and the whole. And perhaps that's what makes it so life-changing, because it challenges us not just to understand identity, but to embrace the beauty of change itself. Stability-Instability Paradox. Imagine a world where the more secure you try to make things, the more dangerous they become. It sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? But this is the essence of the Stability-Instability Paradox, a concept rooted in political science and international relations that reveals how attempts to maintain peace and stability can, paradoxically, increase the likelihood of conflict. It's a fascinating and unsettling idea that challenges our understanding of security and the delicate balance of power. The Stability-Instability Paradox emerged during the Cold War, a period defined by the tension between two nuclear superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both nations possessed enough nuclear weapons to destroy each other and the world many times over. This concept of mutually assured destruction created what seemed like an ironic form of peace. After all, no rational actor would start a nuclear war knowing it would result in total annihilation. But here's where the paradox comes in. While the threat of nuclear war stabilized relations at the global level, it made smaller, localized conflicts more likely. Why? Because when two major powers know that full-scale war is off the table, they might feel emboldened to engage in smaller, indirect confrontations. During the Cold War, this played out in the form of proxy wars, conflicts in Vietnam, Korea, and Afghanistan, where the superpowers supported opposing sides without directly confronting each other. The very stability created by the nuclear stalemate paradoxically made these smaller wars more likely. At its core, the Stability-Instability Paradox is about incentives. When stability is maintained at the highest level, through a balance of power, deterrence, or fear of escalation, it can create a sense of security that lowers the perceived risks of smaller-scale conflicts. Actors may feel they can engage in limited aggression without triggering a catastrophic response. In this way, the paradox shows how efforts to maintain peace can unintentionally create opportunities for violence. But the paradox isn't confined to the Cold War. It has profound implications for modern geopolitics. Consider the current era of nuclear-armed states. While the doctrine of mutually assured destruction still acts as a deterrent against full-scale war, the same dynamic plays out in regional conflicts. For example, tensions between nuclear-armed neighbors like India and Pakistan have occasionally flared into skirmishes and border disputes, even as the threat of nuclear escalation looms in the background. The paradox reminds us that stability at one level can create instability at another. The Stability-Instability Paradox also applies to areas beyond warfare. Take cybersecurity, for example. As nations and organizations build increasingly secure digital systems, they inadvertently escalate the arms race with hackers and cybercriminals. The more robust the defenses, the more sophisticated the attacks become, leading to a cycle of stability at the systemic level and instability at the tactical level. Similarly, in economics, Efforts to stabilize markets through regulation can sometimes create conditions for localized bubbles or crises as actors exploit perceived safety nets. The paradox raises difficult questions about the nature of security and power. How do we balance efforts to maintain stability with the unintended consequences of those efforts? Is it possible to create a system that is both secure and flexible without encouraging the kind of instability the paradox describes? These questions have no easy answers, but they highlight the importance of thinking critically about the ripple effects of our actions. One of the most profound lessons of the Stability-Instability Paradox is the importance of humility in decision-making. It reminds us that systems, whether they're geopolitical alliances, technological networks, or economic markets, are complex and interconnected. Actions intended to solve one problem often create new ones, and the consequences of those actions can be difficult to predict. The paradox challenges us to think beyond short-term goals and consider the broader dynamics at play. It also underscores the need for communication and trust. In the context of international relations, transparency and dialogue can help mitigate the risks of miscalculation. When actors understand each other's intentions and capabilities, they're less likely to stumble into conflicts that could spiral out of control. The Stability-Instability Paradox shows us the dangers of assuming that stability is self-sustaining. It requires constant effort, cooperation, and vigilance. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the paradox is its persistence. As long as there are imbalances of power or competing interests, the dynamics it describes will continue to shape our world. The paradox forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that peace is fragile and often paradoxical in nature. It's not simply the absence of conflict, it's a delicate equilibrium that can tip into instability when pushed too far. So what can we learn from the Stability-Instability Paradox? First, it teaches us to question the assumption that stability is always a good thing. While stability can reduce the likelihood of large-scale conflict, it can also create conditions for smaller-scale aggression. Second, it challenges us to think critically about the unintended consequences of our actions, particularly in complex systems. And finally, it reminds us that true security requires more than deterrence. It requires understanding, adaptability, and a willingness to engage with uncertainty. In the end, the Stability-Instability Paradox isn't just a concept from international relations. It's a lens for understanding the complexities of human behavior, systems, and relationships. It challenges us to navigate the fine line between peace and conflict, stability and chaos, and to recognize that the answers to these challenges are rarely simple. And perhaps that's the paradox's greatest lesson, that the pursuit of stability is itself a dynamic, ever-evolving process, one that requires constant reflection, humility, and care. Stockdale Paradox. Imagine enduring years of unimaginable suffering and coming out not just intact, but stronger. How would you do it? This is the heart of the Stockdale Paradox, a concept that reveals the delicate balance between hope and brutal realism. Named after Admiral James Stockdale, a U.S. Navy officer and prisoner of war in Vietnam, this paradox challenges conventional wisdom about optimism, resilience, and survival. The Stockdale Paradox originates from Stockdale's harrowing experience as a POW during the Vietnam War. For 8 years, he endured brutal torture, isolation, and uncertainty. Many of his fellow prisoners didn't survive, succumbing to despair or broken spirits. But Stockdale did. And when asked how, his response revealed a paradox that has since inspired leaders, psychologists, and thinkers alike. The optimists, Stockdale said, were the ones who didn't make it. They were the ones who said, "We'll be out by Christmas." And Christmas would come, and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, "We'll be out by Easter." And Easter would come, and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again, and they died of a broken heart. Stockdale explained that survival wasn't about blind optimism or wishful thinking. It was about holding two seemingly contradictory ideas in your mind at the same time. Unwavering faith that you will prevail in the end, and the discipline to confront the brutal facts of your current reality. This is the Stockdale Paradox, the ability to balance hope with realism, to maintain faith in the future while not denying the challenges of the present. It's a paradox because it goes against what we often think of as positive thinking. Blind optimism can lead to disillusionment when reality fails to meet expectations. But at the same time, losing hope entirely can be equally destructive. The paradox lies in finding the equilibrium between these two extremes. Let's explore why this mindset is so powerful. On one hand, having faith in a better future gives you the motivation to keep going. Without hope, despair takes over, making it difficult to endure hardship. But on the other hand, denying the harshness of your circumstances can leave you unprepared for the challenges ahead. By embracing the brutal facts of your situation, you build resilience and develop strategies to survive, even if those strategies are painful or difficult. The Stockdale Paradox shows us that hope and realism aren't opposites. They're complementary forces. In Stockdale's case, this paradox played out in a literal life-and-death scenario, but its lessons extend far beyond the battlefield. In business, relationships, and personal growth, the Stockdale Paradox teaches us how to navigate adversity. For example, in the face of a failing project, blind optimism might lead you to ignore warning signs and press on without a plan, while pure pessimism might cause you to give up entirely. The Stockdale Paradox suggests a third path, acknowledging the challenges while maintaining faith in your ability to find a solution. This mindset is particularly relevant in times of crisis, whether it's a global pandemic, an economic downturn, or a personal struggle. When the future feels uncertain, it's tempting to either cling to false hope or sink into despair. The Stockdale Paradox reminds us to do neither. Instead, it calls us to face the reality of our circumstances head-on while holding on to the belief that we can overcome them. Psychologists have found that this approach aligns with the concept of adaptive resilience. Resilient people don't deny the difficulties they face, but they also don't let those difficulties define them. They adapt, finding ways to grow and persevere even in the darkest times. The Stockdale Paradox captures this balance perfectly, showing that resilience isn't about avoiding pain. It's about enduring it with purpose. The paradox also highlights the dangers of false hope. Stockdale's fellow prisoners who clung to unrealistic timelines were devastated when those timelines came and went. Their misplaced optimism left them unprepared for the long haul. This doesn't mean we should avoid hope altogether. It means we need to ground our hope in reality. Hope that is tethered to a clear-eyed view of the situation becomes a source of strength, not weakness. But the Stockdale Paradox isn't just about surviving adversity. It's about thriving through it. Stockdale didn't just endure his time as a prisoner of war. He emerged from it with a deeper understanding of himself and the world. He found meaning in his suffering, using it to grow and to inspire others. This is a crucial part of the paradox, the idea that even in the darkest moments, we can find purpose and meaning that carry us forward. So how can we apply the Stockdale Paradox to our own lives? First, we need to practice radical honesty about our circumstances. This means confronting the facts, no matter how uncomfortable they are. Denial might feel easier in the short term, but it leaves us vulnerable in the long run. Second, we need to cultivate a deep and abiding faith in our ability to overcome challenges. This isn't blind optimism. It's a belief rooted in the knowledge that we are capable of enduring and adapting. The Stockdale Paradox also calls us to develop emotional flexibility. It's not about suppressing fear or despair, but about allowing those emotions to coexist with hope and determination. This balance requires self-awareness and reflection, as well as a willingness to embrace discomfort as part of the journey. In the end, the Stockdale Paradox isn't just a lesson in survival. It's a blueprint for living a meaningful life. It teaches us that the human spirit is capable of incredible resilience when we balance hope with realism, faith with action, and optimism with pragmatism. It reminds us that even in the face of immense suffering, we can find strength, purpose, and growth. So the next time you face a challenge that feels overwhelming, remember the wisdom of Admiral Stockdale. Hold on to the belief that you will prevail, but never shy away from confronting the truth of your situation, because in that delicate balance lies the power to not just survive, but to thrive. And that's the paradox's greatest lesson, that hope and honesty together are the keys to enduring life's greatest tests. Paradox of choice. Imagine walking into an ice cream shop. You're craving something sweet and you're ready to indulge, but instead of the usual 5 or 6 flavors, you're greeted with 50 options: chocolate, vanilla, pistachio, salted caramel, mango sorbet, rocky road, and so many more. At first, you're thrilled, but as you try to decide, you start to feel overwhelmed. You second-guess yourself. What if you choose pistachio but miss out on the salted caramel? What if rocky road would have been perfect? Suddenly, what should have been a simple and joyful decision turns into a stressful, exhausting ordeal. This is the paradox of choice. The idea that while more choices may seem better, they can actually make us less happy, more anxious, and ultimately less satisfied with the decisions we make. It's a concept that challenges one of modern society's biggest assumptions, that freedom of choice is always a good thing. The paradox of choice was popularized by psychologist Barry Schwartz, who argued that having too many options can paralyze us. When faced with an overwhelming number of choices, we often struggle to make a decision at all. Think about it. How many times have you spent ages scrolling through streaming platforms, unable to pick a movie, only to end up rewatching something familiar? The more options we have, the harder it is to decide, because each choice carries the fear of missing out on something better. But the paradox doesn't stop at indecision. It also affects how satisfied we feel after we make a choice. Let's go back to the ice cream shop. You finally decide on salted caramel, but as you eat it, you can't help but wonder if you would have enjoyed pistachio more. Even if the salted caramel is delicious, your enjoyment is diminished by the nagging thought of what you might have missed. This is known as post-decision regret, and it's one of the key ways the paradox of choice undermines our happiness. One reason this happens is because of something psychologists call opportunity cost. Every time we make a choice, we're also choosing not to do something else. When there are only a few options, the opportunity cost feels small. But when there are dozens or hundreds of possibilities, the cost of what we didn't choose feels enormous. We become hyper-aware of the alternatives we gave up, and this makes it harder to fully enjoy the option we picked. Another factor at play is our own expectations. The more options we have, the higher our expectations become. If you only have 3 ice cream flavors to choose from, you might just be happy with what you get. But when there are 50, you expect the perfect flavor, the one that will blow your mind. And if the salted caramel doesn't deliver that impossible level of satisfaction, you feel disappointed, not because it wasn't good, but because it wasn't perfect. The paradox of choice shows us that more options don't just give us more freedom, they also give us more room for disappointment. Interestingly, the paradox of choice doesn't affect everyone in the same way. Some people, known as maximizers, feel compelled to find the absolute best option in any situation. Maximizers are the ones who will read hundreds of reviews before buying a phone, or spend hours researching restaurants before picking a place to eat. While this thoroughness might seem like a good thing, it often leads to stress and dissatisfaction because maximizers are constantly worrying about whether they made the right choice. On the other hand, satisficers are people who aim for good enough. They make decisions quickly and don't obsess over what they might have missed, which often makes them happier and more relaxed. The paradox of choice has profound implications for how we live our lives. In today's world, we're bombarded with options: what to eat, what to wear, what to watch, where to live, who to date, what career to pursue. On the surface, this abundance of choice seems empowering, but in reality, it can lead to decision fatigue, a state where the sheer effort of choosing leaves us drained and less capable of making good decisions. So, how do we navigate the paradox of choice? One solution is to embrace the idea of good enough. Instead of obsessing over finding the perfect option, we can learn to appreciate the choices we make and let go of what we didn't choose. Another strategy is to set limits on the number of options we consider. For example, instead of endlessly scrolling through a streaming platform, we could pick from the first 5 movies we see. By simplifying our decision-making process, we reduce stress and increase satisfaction. The paradox of choice also teaches us a deeper lesson about happiness. True happiness doesn't come from having unlimited options. It comes from being present and content with the choices we make. It reminds us that freedom isn't about having endless possibilities. It's about having the clarity and confidence to choose without regret. In the end, the paradox of choice isn't just about ice cream flavors or streaming platforms. It's a reflection of how we navigate the complexity of modern life. It challenges us to rethink our assumptions about freedom and happiness and to recognize that sometimes less really is more. By understanding this paradox, we can make better decisions, find greater peace of mind, and ultimately live more fulfilling lives. Schrödinger's cat paradox. A cat locked in a box is both alive and dead at the same time. How is that possible? This is the thought experiment at the heart of Schrödinger's cat, one of the most famous paradoxes in physics. It challenges how we understand reality, observation, and the strange rules of the quantum world. But don't worry, no cats were harmed in the making of this paradox. It's not about actual feline cruelty. It's about unraveling the mysteries of existence. The story starts in 1935, when Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger devised the experiment to highlight what he saw as the bizarre and unsettling implications of quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is the branch of physics that deals with the very small, the particles that make up atoms. At this microscopic level, the rules of reality behave very differently from what we experience in our everyday lives. To explain this, let's set the stage for Schrödinger's cat. Imagine a sealed box containing a cat, a radioactive atom, a Geiger counter, and a vial of poison. The setup works like this. If the radioactive atom decays, the Geiger counter detects it, triggering the release of the poison, which kills the cat. If the atom does not decay, the poison is never released, and the cat remains alive. The twist is that according to quantum mechanics, the atom exists in a state of superposition. It has both decayed and not decayed at the same time. And because the atom's state determines the fate of the cat, too, is in a state of superposition, both alive and dead at once. This seems absurd, doesn't it? How can the cat be both alive and dead? Schrödinger's thought experiment wasn't meant to explain quantum mechanics. It was meant to criticize it. He wanted to show how strange and counterintuitive the implications of quantum theory could be when applied to everyday objects. At the heart of the paradox is the idea that in the quantum world, particles don't exist in definite states until they are observed. Before you open the box and check on the cat, it exists in both states simultaneously, alive and dead. The act of observation forces the cat into one state or the other, collapsing the superposition. This idea is known as the Copenhagen interpretation, one of the most widely accepted interpretations of quantum mechanics. It suggests that reality at the quantum level isn't fixed until it's observed. In other words, observation creates reality. But Schrödinger's cat forces us to confront just how strange this idea really is. If observation determines reality, then what counts as an observation? Does it have to be a conscious human observer, or could the Geiger counter itself count as an observation? And if observation creates reality, what does that say about the nature of reality itself? The paradox also raises deep philosophical questions. What does it mean for something to exist in two states at once? In everyday life, things are either one way or the other. A light is on or off, a door is open or closed. But in the quantum world, things can exist in a state of both and rather than either or. This challenges our intuitive understanding of how the world works, forcing us to think in entirely new ways. Schrödinger's cat also highlights the problem of scale in quantum mechanics. At the level of atoms and particles, superposition makes sense, and experiments have shown that it's real. But at the level of cats, people, or planets, things seem to behave differently. This disconnect between the quantum world and the everyday world is one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in physics. How do the strange rules of quantum mechanics give rise to the familiar rules of classical physics? The cat-in-the-box paradox sits at the center of this question. Interestingly, there are other interpretations of quantum mechanics that offer different explanations. For example, the many worlds interpretation suggests that when you open the box, the universe splits into two. In one universe, the cat is alive. In the other, the cat is dead. In this view, superposition isn't about the cat being both alive and dead in the same universe. It's about the existence of parallel universes where every possible outcome is realized. Another interpretation, known as quantum decoherence, suggests that superposition is disrupted by interaction with the environment. In this view, the cat isn't truly alive and dead at the same time. It's just that our inability to measure the quantum interactions creates the illusion of superposition. These interpretations show that Schrödinger's cat isn't just a paradox. It's a doorway into some of the most profound questions about reality, time, and existence. Schrödinger's cat also has practical implications. Quantum mechanics isn't just theoretical. It underpins much of modern technology, from semiconductors to quantum computers. Quantum superposition, the very concept behind the cat paradox, is what allows quantum computers to perform calculations far beyond the capabilities of classical machines. Understanding these principles isn't just a philosophical exercise. It's the foundation of technological progress. In the end, Schrödinger's cat is more than just a quirky thought experiment. It's a profound exploration of the mysteries of reality. It challenges us to think beyond our everyday experiences and confront the strange, counterintuitive rules of the quantum world. And perhaps its greatest lesson is that reality, at its deepest level, may be far stranger and more complex than we ever imagined. So the next time you think of Schrödinger's cat, remember, it's not just a paradox. It's a reminder that the universe still has secrets waiting to be uncovered. Grandfather Paradox. Imagine a scenario where time travel is possible and you have a time machine. You decide to travel back in time to meet your grandfather when he was a young man. However, things take a dramatic turn. While you're in the past, you accidentally prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. This means your parents were never born, and consequently, you were never born. Here's the twist. If you were never born, how could you have traveled back in time to prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother? If you never existed, you couldn't have gone back in time to create this situation in the first place. This creates a logical contradiction because your actions in the past seem to negate your own existence. This is known as the Grandfather Paradox. It's a classic problem in discussions about time travel and causality. The paradox challenges our understanding of cause and effect, and it raises questions about the consistency of time and the possibility of altering the past. To visualize this paradox, think of it like this. If you could go back and change events in a way that prevents your own existence, you create a situation where you shouldn't have been able to make those changes. This creates a paradox where the cause, your time travel, contradicts the effect, your existence. The Grandfather Paradox is not just a theoretical puzzle. It has significant implications for our understanding of time travel. If such time travel were possible, it could lead to contradictions and complex issues regarding causality and the flow of time. The Grandfather Paradox leads to intriguing questions about the nature of time and reality. If time travel to the past could result in such paradoxes, what does this mean for the possibility of traveling back in time? One common response to the paradox involves the concept of parallel universes, or alternate timelines. According to this theory, if you were to travel back in time and alter events, you would create a new parallel timeline where the changes take place. In this new timeline, your actions would have prevented your own existence in that specific timeline, but it wouldn't affect the original timeline you came from. In this way, the Grandfather Paradox is resolved by suggesting that time travel creates branching timelines rather than altering a single, fixed timeline. Each timeline remains consistent within its own context, avoiding contradictions by separating the changes into different realities. Another approach to addressing the paradox is the idea of time loops or closed time-like curves. This theory suggests that events in the past are part of a closed loop, meaning that any actions you take when traveling back in time are already accounted for in the timeline. Essentially, you might find that you cannot change significant events in the past because they are already integrated into the timeline. In this view, the paradox is resolved by the idea that the timeline is self-consistent. Your actions, even if they seem to contradict the possibility of your existence, are part of a larger, unchangeable loop of events that doesn't allow for contradictions. The grandfather paradox also prompts discussions about the limitations of our understanding of time and causality. It challenges our intuitive notions of cause and effect and forces us to reconsider how we think about the flow of time and the possibility of altering past events. The grandfather paradox is more than just a philosophical puzzle. It has implications for various fields, including physics, philosophy, and even popular culture. The paradox stimulates discussions about the nature of time, causality, and the feasibility of time travel. In physics, the paradox raises questions about the consistency of physical laws and the possibility of time travel. While many theories, such as Einstein's theory of relativity, allow for the theoretical possibility of time travel, they also imply constraints that could prevent paradoxes like the grandfather paradox from occurring. For example, some physicists argue that certain conditions, such as the need for infinite energy or closed time-like curves, may prevent paradoxical scenarios. Philosophically, the paradox challenges our understanding of determinism and free will. If time travel were possible, it could lead to questions about whether our actions are predetermined or whether we have the freedom to alter the course of events. The paradox forces us to grapple with the implications of altering past events and the potential consequences for our understanding of reality. In popular culture, the grandfather paradox has inspired numerous works of fiction, from novels to movies, exploring the complexities and consequences of time travel. These fictional portrayals often play with the paradox in creative ways, highlighting the challenges and potential solutions to time travel dilemmas. Looking ahead, the grandfather paradox remains a valuable thought experiment for exploring the boundaries of our understanding of time and reality. While time travel remains a theoretical concept, the paradox provides insights into the challenges and limitations that would arise if such phenomena were possible. In summary, the grandfather paradox is a compelling puzzle that prompts us to reconsider our notions of time, causality, and the nature of reality. By examining the paradox and its implications, we gain a deeper understanding of the complexities associated with time travel and the broader philosophical questions it raises. Card paradox. Picture holding a simple card with two statements written on either side. On one side, it says, "The statement on the other side of this card is true." When you flip it over, the other side says, "The statement on the other side of this card is false." At first, this might seem like a harmless little puzzle, but as you start to think it through, you quickly realize something astonishing. It doesn't make sense. This is the card paradox, a thought experiment that challenges our understanding of truth, logic, and self-reference. The card paradox belongs to a family of puzzles known as self-referential paradoxes. These are scenarios where a statement refers to itself in a way that creates a logical contradiction. The paradox on the card works like this. If the statement on the first side is true, the statement on the other side is true, then the statement on the other side is false, must also be true. But if that's true, then the first statement must be false. And if the first statement is false, then the second statement becomes false as well, looping us back to the first. It's a never-ending cycle of contradictions with no resolution. At its core, the card paradox forces us to confront the limits of our logical systems. Our brains are wired to think in terms of true and false, yes and no. But self-referential paradoxes like this one reveal that even the simplest logical structures can break down when they turn inward on themselves. The card paradox isn't just a quirky brain teaser. It's a profound challenge to the way we think about truth and meaning. To understand why this paradox is so significant, let's dig deeper into what it teaches us about logic. In formal systems, a statement is typically either true or false. This is known as the law of the excluded middle. But the card paradox defies this principle by creating a situation where neither truth nor falsehood seems to apply. Instead, the statements feed into each other in an endless loop. This breakdown of logic is what makes the paradox so intriguing and so unsettling. One of the most famous self-referential paradoxes, the Liar's Paradox, works in a similar way. It's the statement, "This sentence is false." If the sentence is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. Like the card paradox, the Liar's Paradox reveals the fragility of logical systems when faced with self-reference. The card paradox takes this idea a step further by involving two statements that rely on each other, rather than a single statement referring to itself. Philosophers and logicians have grappled with these kinds of paradoxes for centuries. In the early 20th century, the mathematician Kurt Gödel made a groundbreaking discovery. Any sufficiently complex formal system contains statements that are true but unprovable within the system itself. Gödel's incompleteness theorems, as they're called, show that no logical system can be both complete and consistent. The card paradox is a playful example of this principle, highlighting the inherent limitations of logical reasoning. But the implications of the card paradox go beyond formal logic. It also raises fascinating questions about language and meaning. When we communicate, we rely on shared definitions and assumptions to convey ideas. But the card paradox demonstrates how language can create contradictions that defy resolution. It's a reminder that even the words and concepts we take for granted can break down under close scrutiny. The paradox also has psychological dimensions. It forces us to confront uncertainty and ambiguity, two things that humans are notoriously uncomfortable with. Our natural instinct is to resolve contradictions and find clarity. But the card paradox denies us that resolution, leaving us in a state of cognitive dissonance. This can be frustrating, but it's also an opportunity to expand our thinking and embrace complexity. So, what can we learn from the card paradox? First, it teaches us to question our assumptions about truth and logic. It shows that even the most basic ideas can become deeply complex when viewed from a new perspective. Second, it challenges us to think critically about self-reference and the ways it shapes our understanding of the world. And finally, it reminds us to embrace ambiguity as a natural part of life. Not every question has a clear answer, and sometimes the journey of exploring a paradox is more valuable than resolving it. The card paradox isn't just a clever puzzle, it's a gateway to some of the deepest questions about logic, language, and the human mind. It invites us to think beyond binary categories, to explore the limits of knowledge, and to appreciate the beauty of contradictions. So the next time you see a simple card with two statements, remember, it's not just a piece of paper. It's an invitation to expand your understanding of the universe. And that's a paradox worth pondering. Catch-22. Paradox. You need to escape, but the only way out is to prove you're insane. However, the very act of trying to escape proves you're sane enough to stay. This is the Catch-22, a paradox that traps you in a no-win situation where every option seems to cancel itself out. It's a problem of logic, bureaucracy, and human frustration all rolled into one, and it's one of the most relatable paradoxes in modern life. The term Catch-22 comes from Joseph Heller's 1961 novel of the same name. In the book, it refers to a rule in the military. If a soldier wants to be excused from dangerous missions, they must prove they're insane. But here's the twist. If the soldier applies for an exemption, they're showing concern for their own safety, a perfectly rational act, which means they're not insane. On the other hand, if they don't apply, they're willingly putting themselves in harm's way, which might suggest insanity, but also leaves them stuck in the missions. There's no escape. The genius of the Catch-22 is how it captures the absurdity of bureaucratic logic. It's a rule that creates a closed loop, trapping anyone who tries to engage with it. And while it originated in Heller's novel, the concept of a Catch-22 is something most of us have experienced in real life. Think about job hunting. Many entry-level positions require years of experience. But how do you get experience if all the jobs that offer it demand experience to begin with? Or consider applying for credit. You need a credit history to get approved, but you can't build a credit history without getting approved first. These are modern-day catch-22s, situations where the system feels designed to work against you. What makes the catch-22 so frustrating is its circular nature. Every option leads you back to where you started. It's not just a matter of bad luck or tough choices. It's the system itself that creates the impossibility. You're trapped by the logic of the rule, and there's no way to break free without contradicting the rule itself. But the catch-22 isn't just about individual frustration. It's also a reflection of larger societal and institutional problems. It reveals how rules and systems, which are supposed to help us, can sometimes become self-defeating. Bureaucracies, in particular, are notorious for creating catch-22s. Think of a government agency requiring paperwork that's impossible to obtain without their approval, or a university insisting on prerequisites for a course that can only be fulfilled by taking the course itself. The paradox also raises deeper questions about power and control. In a catch-22, the system holds all the cards. The individual is forced to play by rules that are inherently unfair, often with no one to appeal to. It's a stark reminder of how systems can use logic not to clarify or solve problems, but to maintain authority and keep people trapped. Philosophically, the catch-22 challenges how we think about logic and fairness. Logic is supposed to help us make sense of the world, but the catch-22 shows how logic can also create traps when it's applied without consideration for real-world consequences. It's a warning about what happens when we let rules take precedence over human needs and common sense. One of the reasons the catch-22 resonates so deeply is that it's not just a theoretical problem. It's a lived experience for many people, from navigating complex bureaucracies to dealing with paradoxical social norms. The catch-22 is a reflection of the absurdities we face every day. It's why the term has become a cultural touchstone, used to describe everything from workplace dilemmas to legal loopholes. But what can we do when faced with a catch-22? The first step is recognizing the paradox for what it is. Sometimes, just understanding that you're dealing with a self-defeating system can help you navigate it more effectively. You might not be able to break the loop, but you can look for ways to work around it, whether that means finding alternative paths, challenging the rules, or seeking help from someone who understands the system better. The catch-22 also reminds us of the importance of questioning the systems we live in. Why do these paradoxes exist? Are they the result of poor design, or do they serve a purpose? In many cases, catch-22s persist because they maintain the status quo, making it harder for people to challenge authority or break free from the rules. By identifying these paradoxes and calling attention to them, we can push for changes that make systems more fair and humane. Ultimately, the catch-22 is more than just a frustrating puzzle. It's a reflection of the human condition. It captures the tension between individual agency and systemic control, between logic and absurdity. And while it may not always have a solution, it teaches us to think critically about the rules we follow and the systems we navigate. The next time you find yourself stuck in a catch-22, remember that you're not alone. This paradox has been baffling and frustrating people for decades, and it likely always will. But by understanding it, we can start to see the hidden dynamics at play, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to turn the system on its head. Unexpected hanging paradox. A prisoner is sentenced to be hanged, but with an unusual twist. The judge announces, "You will be hanged at noon on one weekday next week, but it will be a surprise. You won't know the day of your execution until the executioner arrives." The prisoner, desperate to avoid the noose, thinks carefully and begins to analyze the situation. If the execution happens on Friday, he reasons, it won't be a surprise, because if he's still alive by Thursday evening, Friday is the only day left, so Friday is ruled out. Then, if Friday is ruled out, Thursday can't be the day either. After all, if he's alive by Wednesday night, Thursday would also be predictable. Using this same logic, the prisoner eliminates Wednesday, Tuesday, and even Monday. He concludes that the judge's statement is impossible, and he'll never be hanged. Feeling relieved, the prisoner goes to bed, confident in his reasoning. But on Wednesday, at noon, the executioner arrives and the prisoner is hanged completely by surprise. How is this possible? This is the unexpected hanging paradox, a thought experiment that has baffled philosophers, mathematicians, and logicians for decades. It's a paradox that plays with our understanding of logic, knowledge, and self-fulfilling reasoning. At first glance, the prisoner's reasoning seems airtight. By eliminating each day as a possibility, he concludes that the judge's statement contradicts itself. But this paradox reveals a deeper flaw in how we think about knowledge and surprise. The key lies in the prisoner's assumption that he can predict the execution by ruling out days. While his logic is internally consistent, it fails to account for the very nature of surprise. Let's break it down. The judge's promise has two parts. First, the prisoner will be hanged next week. Second, the hanging will come as a surprise. The prisoner's mistake is in treating these two conditions as if they are entirely separate. By trying to outsmart the judge, the prisoner convinces himself that the hanging can't happen at all. But this very conclusion ensures that when the execution does occur, on a day he ruled out, it will indeed be a surprise, fulfilling the judge's promise. The unexpected hanging paradox challenges our understanding of logical reasoning and prediction. It highlights the limits of deductive reasoning, especially when applied to situations involving surprise or uncertainty. The prisoner's logic works only if he assumes that his deductions can't be wrong. But the paradox exposes how his own reasoning creates the conditions for the judge's statement to hold true. This paradox has fascinated logicians because it raises profound questions about the nature of self-referential statements and the relationship between knowledge and uncertainty. It's similar to other paradoxes, like the liar paradox, where a statement like, "This sentence is false," creates a loop of contradiction. In the unexpected hanging paradox, the prisoner's reasoning becomes self-referential. He uses his predictions to try to avoid the surprise, but those very predictions ensure the surprise happens. Philosophers have debated the deeper implications of this paradox for decades. One interpretation is that it reveals the limits of human reasoning. Our logical systems rely on clear rules and assumptions, but the unexpected hanging paradox shows that even the most rigorous reasoning can break down when it encounters uncertainty or self-reference. It forces us to confront the possibility that some aspects of reality might be fundamentally unpredictable. The paradox also has connections to game theory and decision-making. In game theory, players often try to anticipate their opponent's moves, but the unexpected hanging paradox shows how overthinking and second-guessing can backfire. By trying to predict the execution, the prisoner inadvertently ensures its success. This has parallels in real life, where attempts to outsmart systems or predict outcomes can lead to unintended consequences. But the paradox isn't just a puzzle for philosophers. It has practical implications for how we think about surprise, uncertainty, and planning. It reminds us that not everything can be predicted or controlled, no matter how much we analyze or prepare. In a world filled with uncertainty, the unexpected hanging paradox teaches us to embrace the unexpected and recognize the limits of our knowledge. What's particularly striking about this paradox is its ability to create tension between logic and intuition. On the surface, the prisoner's reasoning feels flawless. Yet the moment the execution happens, we realize the flaw in his thinking. This tension between expectation and reality is what makes the paradox so compelling and so deeply unsettling. The unexpected hanging paradox forces us to confront one of life's greatest mysteries, the nature of the unknown. It challenges us to think critically about how we approach uncertainty and reminds us that even the most carefully constructed plans can be upended by the unexpected. And perhaps that's the paradox's greatest lesson, that sometimes the only certainty is surprise itself. Barber Paradox. Imagine a small town with a peculiar rule. There is only one barber, and this barber shaves everyone in town who does not shave themselves. The rule is simple and absolute. The barber must shave all those who don't shave themselves and only those who don't shave themselves. But here's the question: who shaves the barber? At first glance, it seems like there should be a straightforward answer. But as you think it through, the situation becomes impossible. If the barber shaves himself, he violates the rule because the barber is only supposed to shave those who don't shave themselves. But if the barber doesn't shave himself, then he must follow the rule and shave himself because he shaves everyone who doesn't. No matter how you approach it, the barber ends up trapped in a logical contradiction. This is the Barber Paradox. The Barber Paradox was introduced by British mathematician and philosopher Bertrand Russell to illustrate a deeper issue in the foundations of logic and mathematics. On the surface, it's a playful thought experiment, but it actually points to a serious problem. What happens when a set or system refers to itself? In this case, the barber's shaving rule creates a self-referential loop that cannot be resolved without breaking its own logic. To understand the paradox more deeply, let's step back and look at what's happening here. The barber's job is defined by a rule. He must shave all and only those who do not shave themselves. This rule divides the townspeople into two groups, those who shave themselves and those who don't. But when we try to include the barber in one of these groups, the rule collapses. If he shaves himself, he belongs to the group of people who shave themselves, which means he shouldn't be shaving himself. If he doesn't shave himself, he belongs to the group of people who don't shave themselves, which means he should shave himself. There's no way for the barber to follow the rule without creating a contradiction. At its core, the Barber Paradox is about self-reference. What happens when a rule or system applies to itself? It's a close relative of the liar's paradox, where a statement like, "This sentence is false," creates a similar loop of contradiction. Both paradoxes show how self-reference can break the rules of logic, creating situations where no consistent solution exists. But the Barber Paradox isn't just a quirky thought experiment. It has profound implications for mathematics, philosophy, and even computer science. Bertrand Russell used it to highlight a problem with set theory, a branch of mathematics that deals with collections of objects. In the early 20th century, mathematicians believed that any logical statement about sets should make sense. For example, you could talk about the set of all chairs or the set of all numbers. But Russell noticed a problem when he considered the set of all sets that your understanding of themselves. At first, this idea seems harmless. Most sets don't contain themselves. For example, the set of all apples doesn't include itself. It's a set, not an apple. But when you try to define the set of all sets that don't contain themselves, you run into a problem. Does this set contain itself? If it does, then by definition it shouldn't. And if it doesn't, then by definition it should. This contradiction, known as Russell's paradox, shook the foundations of mathematics and forced mathematicians to rethink how they defined sets and logical systems. The Barber Paradox is a simplified version of this problem designed to make the issue easier to understand. It shows how seemingly simple rules can create profound contradictions when they're applied to themselves. This has practical implications far beyond mathematics. In computer science, for example, self-referential systems can create bugs or crashes. A program that tries to analyze itself might run into infinite loops or contradictions. Just like the barber, the paradox also has philosophical implications, especially when it comes to understanding the limits of logic and language. We often assume that logic is the ultimate tool for making sense of the world, but paradoxes like this one show that even logic has its boundaries. Self-reference is everywhere in human thought, from the way we describe ourselves to the way we construct systems of rules. The Barber Paradox reminds us that these systems are not always as solid as they seem. So, what's the solution to the Barber Paradox? The short answer is that there isn't one, not within the rules of the paradox itself. The only way to resolve the contradiction is to change the rules. In the case of mathematics, Russell's paradox led to the development of new systems, like set theories that avoid self-referential definitions. In everyday life, the lesson is that some problems can't be solved within their own frameworks. Sometimes, the only way to move forward is to step back and rethink the assumptions that created the problem in the first place. The Barber Paradox may seem like a small, playful puzzle, but it opens the door to some of the most profound questions about logic, reasoning, and the way we make sense of the world. It challenges us to think critically about the systems we create and the assumptions we take for granted. And perhaps most importantly, It shows us that even the simplest ideas can contain hidden depths, paradoxes that force us to see the world in a completely new way. Bootstrap Paradox. Imagine receiving a book filled with revolutionary ideas, only to discover that it was written by you, except you haven't written it yet. Now imagine you travel back in time and give this book to your younger self. Your younger self uses it to write the book in the future. The question is, where did the book actually come from? This is the Bootstrap Paradox, one of the most mind-bending concepts in time travel, where an object or piece of information exists without any clear point of origin. It loops endlessly through time, defying our understanding of cause and effect. The Bootstrap Paradox is named after the idea of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, a phrase meant to describe something that seems impossible. In this paradox, something creates itself. It exists because it was sent back in time, but its origin remains a mystery. It's a paradox that forces us to question the very nature of time, causality, and reality. To make it simpler, let's break it down with a classic example. Imagine a scientist in the future invents a time machine. They travel back in time and meet their younger self, giving them the detailed blueprints for building the time machine. The younger self uses these blueprints to build the machine and eventually grows up to become the same scientist who travels back in time. But here's the problem. Where did the original idea for the time machine come from? It wasn't invented. It was simply passed around in an endless loop. The machine exists, but it has no true beginning. This paradox challenges one of our most fundamental assumptions about reality, that every effect must have a cause. In the Bootstrap Paradox, the cause and effect are tangled in such a way that they become indistinguishable. The time machine exists, but its origin is stuck in a loop, forever recycling itself. What makes the Bootstrap Paradox so fascinating is that it's not just a thought experiment. It has implications for how we understand time and causality. In our everyday experience, time flows in one direction, from past to present to future. Cause leads to effect, and actions have consequences. But in a time travel scenario, these rules break down. The past can influence the future, but the future can also influence the past, creating a feedback loop where the origin of events becomes impossible to trace. Philosophically, the Bootstrap Paradox raises profound questions about free will and determinism. If the blueprints for the time machine have no origin, does that mean the scientist's actions are predetermined by the loop? Or is the paradox itself a demonstration of how free will can exist outside of linear causality? The paradox forces us to confront the possibility that time isn't as straightforward as it seems, that it might be a much more flexible and interconnected phenomenon. Science fiction often explores the Bootstrap Paradox in creative ways. One famous example is the movie Terminator. In the film, a character travels back in time to protect a future leader, but in doing so, becomes part of the events that lead to that leader's rise. Another example is the classic time travel novel, The Time Traveler's Wife, which plays with the idea of a self-contained loop in which events happen because they've already happened. These stories highlight the paradox's strange and captivating nature, inviting us to imagine a reality where time is anything but linear. From a scientific perspective, the Bootstrap Paradox is tied to theories about time travel, particularly in the context of general relativity. Einstein's equations allow for the possibility of closed time-like curves, essentially loops in space-time where events can circle back on themselves. While this idea remains theoretical, it suggests that the paradox might not just be a product of imagination, but a potential feature of the universe itself. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The Bootstrap Paradox isn't just about time travel. It's about information and causality. Imagine a piece of information, like a scientific formula or a historical event, that exists solely because it was sent back in time. Who created it? If the information has no origin, does it really exist? This idea challenges our understanding of knowledge and creation, blurring the lines between what is real and what is merely a product of the loop. The Bootstrap Paradox also has profound implications for how we think about the universe as a whole. If time can loop back on itself, it raises the possibility that the universe itself might be a self-contained system with no clear beginning or end. In this view, the Big Bang might not be the start of everything, but just one part of a larger, cyclical process. The paradox forces us to question whether anything truly has an origin, or if everything is part of an interconnected web of cause and effect. So is the Bootstrap Paradox solvable? Not within the framework of linear time and causality as we currently understand them. The paradox exists precisely because it defies resolution, challenging us to think beyond our normal assumptions about time and logic. It's not a problem to be solved, but a question to be explored, a doorway into a deeper understanding of the mysteries of time, causality, and existence. The Bootstrap Paradox reminds us that the universe is far stranger and more complex than we often realize. It invites us to imagine realities where beginnings and endings blur, where cause and effect intertwine, and where time itself bends in ways that defy comprehension. And perhaps that's the most profound lesson of the paradox, that even in a world bound by logic and rules, there will always be mysteries that leave us wondering, paradoxes that push us to question, to explore, and to dream. Sorites Paradox. How many grains of sand make a heap? One grain certainly isn't a heap. 2 grains aren't either. But what if you keep adding grains, one at a time? At what exact point does the pile of sand become a heap? This question lies at the heart of the Sorites Paradox, a fascinating thought experiment that reveals how seemingly simple ideas can unravel into profound complexity. At first glance, the paradox seems easy to dismiss. After all, you might say, a heap is just a general term. It doesn't need to be precise. But the moment you start asking where the line is drawn, things get tricky. If 1 grain doesn't make a heap, and adding 1 more grain doesn't suddenly transform it into a heap, does that mean no amount of grains can ever form a heap? This slippery slope of reasoning challenges not just how we define heaps of sand, but how we deal with vague concepts in general. The Sorites Paradox takes its name from the Greek word soros, meaning heap, and has puzzled philosophers for centuries. It isn't just about sand. It's about how we define anything that lacks clear boundaries. Think about baldness. At what point does a person with thinning hair become bald? Or consider wealth. How many dollars do you need to go from being poor to rich? These questions seem trivial at first, but reveal a deeper truth about the limits of language and reasoning. The paradox exposes a fundamental problem with vague concepts. They resist precise definitions. Words like heap, bald, or rich are useful because they allow us to talk about general ideas without needing exact measurements. But when pushed to their limits, these concepts become ambiguous. The Sorites Paradox forces us to confront this ambiguity and question how we can make sense of a world filled with fuzzy boundaries. But Sorites Paradox is by introducing the idea of degrees or gradual change. Instead of thinking in absolutes, heap or not a heap, we could think in terms of probabilities or thresholds. For instance, we might say that as the number of grains increases, the likelihood of the pile being considered a heap gradually rises. This approach avoids drawing a hard line, but raises another question. How do we decide where to place these thresholds? Even with degrees, the problem of vagueness remains. Another proposed solution is to embrace the idea of context. In some contexts, a pile of 50 grains might be called a heap, while in others, it might not. For example, if you're talking about grains of sand on a beach, a small pile might not qualify as a heap. But if you're looking at grains on a table, even a tiny pile might seem like a heap by comparison. This context-dependent view acknowledges that definitions are flexible, shaped by the situations in which they're used. The Sorites Paradox doesn't just challenge how we think about words. It has real-world implications. Take laws, for example. Many legal systems rely on vague concepts like reasonable doubt or excessive force. These terms are intentionally left flexible to accommodate different situations, but they also create room for interpretation and disagreement. The paradox reminds us that while vagueness can be useful, it can also lead to uncertainty and conflict. Similarly, The Sorites Paradox applies to social and ethical questions. Consider climate change. At what point does a gradual increase in temperature become a crisis? Or think about social issues like inequality. How much disparity is too much? These are not just abstract questions. They influence how we respond to some of the most pressing challenges of our time. The Sorites Paradox forces us to confront the fact that many of these problems don't have clear-cut solutions. But perhaps the most profound lesson of the Sorites Paradox is what it reveals about our need for clarity in a messy, ambiguous world. We like to think in categories, dividing things into neat boxes. This is a heap, this isn't. This is bald, this isn't. But the world rarely conforms to such clear distinctions. The Sorites Paradox challenges us to embrace complexity and uncertainty, recognizing that many of the concepts we use are imprecise by nature. In the end, the Sorites Paradox isn't just about grains of sand or fuzzy definitions. It's a reminder of how we navigate the gray areas of life. It teaches us that ambiguity is not a flaw in our thinking, but a reflection of the world's complexity. And perhaps that's what makes this paradox so life-changing. It shows us that the search for clarity often leads not to answers, but to deeper questions, pushing us to think critically about the words we use, the decisions we make, and the way we understand the world. Paradox of lottery. Imagine you've just purchased a ticket for an enormous lottery drawing. The chances of winning are incredibly slim, let's say a mere 1 in 10 million. Despite the overwhelming odds stacked against you, you find yourself filled with excitement and hope. Curiously, when you hold that ticket in your hand, there's a sense of confidence that you just might be the lucky winner. This personal conviction seems oddly rational, even in the face of such astronomical odds. Now, let's expand our perspective. In a massive lottery where each ticket has an infinitesimal chance of winning, every single ticket holder can maintain a sense of optimism about their own prospects. This intriguing phenomenon is known as the paradox of the lottery. The crux of this paradox lies in the stark contrast between the statistically high likelihood of losing and the individual's personal belief that they might emerge victorious. The paradox becomes even more fascinating when we consider the collective outcome. Despite each individual ticket holder nurturing the belief that they might win, the reality is that only one ticket, or perhaps a handful at most, will actually clinch the prize. This creates a striking logical inconsistency. How can we reconcile the fact that so many people harbor the belief that they will win when statistically the vast majority are destined to lose? To illustrate the paradox more vividly, let's envision a lottery with 10 million tickets in circulation. Each ticket carries a 1 in 10 million chance of winning. If every single ticket holder maintains the belief that they will be the fortunate winner, their conviction appears wildly irrational given the overwhelming odds. However, on a personal level, it's somewhat understandable. Each individual is unlikely to contemplate the probability of the entire group losing. Instead, they focus solely on their own ticket and its potential. This paradox shines a spotlight on the intriguing conflict between personal belief and collective statistical reality. It demonstrates how individuals can simultaneously hold seemingly contradictory views. They can believe in their own chance of winning while acknowledging that the majority of ticket holders will inevitably face disappointment. Let's delve deeper into the intricacies of the paradox of the lottery by examining the fascinating interplay between individual belief and statistical reality. Each lottery participant's conviction that they might win is deeply rooted in their personal investment in the outcome. Even though they are intellectually aware of the minuscule probability of winning, their hope burns bright and remains intensely personal. This deeply held personal belief stands in stark contrast to the cold, hard statistical reality. From a purely mathematical standpoint, if there are 10 million tickets in circulation and only one ultimate winner, the probability of winning with any given ticket is astonishingly low. Yet, remarkably, this statistical fact seems to have little impact on the optimistic outlook maintained by each ticket holder. One illuminating approach to understanding this paradox is to consider the concept of subjective versus objective probability. Subjective probability refers to the personal belief or confidence an individual holds regarding an outcome, while objective probability represents the actual mathematical likelihood of an event occurring. In the context of the lottery, the subjective probability for each ticket holder is heavily influenced by their hope and personal investment in the outcome. This subjective perspective can lead to the seemingly irrational belief that their particular ticket somehow possesses a better chance of winning than it objectively does. Conversely, the objective probability reflects the true, exceedingly small chance of winning. This stark disparity between subjective belief and objective probability lies at the heart of the paradox. Individuals cling to their personal chances of success, despite being aware of the statistical odds, resulting in an apparent contradiction. The paradox extends beyond mere improbability of winning. It delves into the very nature of rationality in personal belief when confronted with overwhelming odds. The paradox also intersects with fascinating cognitive biases and psychological factors that shape human decision-making. People often exhibit a tendency to overestimate their own chances of success in scenarios with low probabilities, a phenomenon psychologists refer to as the optimism bias. This cognitive bias helps explain why individuals can maintain a rational belief in their potential to win, even when the odds are overwhelmingly stacked against them. The paradox of the lottery opens up a Pandora's box of intriguing questions about human psychology, decision-making processes, and belief systems. It challenges our fundamental understanding of how individuals perceive probabilities and make choices based on those perceptions. One significant implication of this paradox is that it underscores the limitations inherent in purely rational decision-making models. Traditional rational models operate under the assumption that individuals make decisions based solely on objective probabilities. However, the paradox of the lottery vividly demonstrates that personal beliefs and psychological factors can exert a powerful influence on decision-making, often leading to behavior that appears irrational when viewed through the lens of statistical reality. This paradox also carries broader implications for our understanding of how people navigate risk and uncertainty in various aspects of life. Beyond the realm of lotteries, individuals frequently encounter situations where the probability of a desired outcome is extremely low, yet their personal belief in a positive result remains steadfast. This phenomenon can significantly influence behavior across diverse domains, including gambling, investment decisions, and even health-related choices. Another fascinating aspect of the paradox is its relevance to ongoing discussions in the fields of probability theory and decision theory. It highlights the complexity involved in aligning subjective beliefs with objective probabilities and poses a challenge to traditional models that assume purely rational decision-making processes. Ultimately, the paradox of the lottery serves as a powerful reminder of the profound influence that hope and personal belief exert in shaping human behavior. Despite the cold, hard statistical odds, individuals' beliefs and emotions play a pivotal role in their decision-making processes. By grappling with this paradox, we gain a deeper appreciation for the intricate and often surprising relationship between probability, belief, and human behavior. In conclusion, the paradox of the lottery offers a captivating exploration of the tension between personal belief and statistical reality. It challenges our conventional understanding of probability, decision-making, and human psychology, providing valuable insights into the complex ways in which we perceive and respond to uncertainty in our lives. Paradox of thrift. Imagine being told that saving your money, a habit you've always thought was responsible and wise, could actually harm the economy. How is that possible? This is the paradox of thrift, an economic idea that flips our understanding of personal finance on its head. It reveals a fascinating contradiction. What's good for an individual may not always be good for society as a whole, and it forces us to rethink the balance between saving and spending, especially during times of economic uncertainty. The paradox starts with a simple, common-sense principle. Saving is good. When you save, you're setting money aside for the future, building financial security, and ensuring that you can weather unexpected expenses. But in an economy, saving doesn't happen in isolation. Your decision to save means spending less, and spending less affects the businesses and workers who depend on consumer demand. The paradox of thrift suggests that when everyone saves at the same time, it can lead to unintended consequences that ripple through the entire economy. Let's break it down. Imagine a small town where everyone suddenly decides to save more money. People stop eating out, shopping for clothes, and taking vacations. At first, this might seem like a good idea. Families are being cautious and preparing for the future. But as spending decreases, local businesses see fewer customers. Restaurants, shops, and travel agencies begin to struggle. They cut back on hiring, lay off workers, or even close their doors. With fewer jobs and less income, people have even less money to spend. The cycle feeds on itself, dragging the economy down further. This is the heart of the paradox of thrift. What's rational and beneficial for one person, saving, can become harmful when everyone does it at once. It's a classic example of what economists call the fallacy of composition, where what's true for the individual isn't necessarily true for the group. While saving money might help you personally, if everyone tightens their belts simultaneously, the overall economy suffers. The paradox was popularized by British economist John Maynard Keynes during the Great Depression. Keynes argued that in times of economic downturn, the collective urge to save could make things worse. When demand falls, businesses cut production, unemployment rises, and the economy spirals downward. In these situations, Keynes suggested, what the economy needs isn't more saving, it's more spending. By spending money, people create demand, which drives production, creates jobs, and stimulates growth. But the paradox of thrift doesn't mean saving is always bad. In a healthy economy, saving plays an important role in fueling long-term growth. Savings become investments, funding businesses, infrastructure projects, and innovation. The paradox applies specifically to periods of economic contraction when a sudden increase in saving can exacerbate a recession. It's a reminder that the impact of saving depends on the broader economic context. The paradox also raises important questions about the role of government in managing the economy. If individuals and businesses are cutting back during a recession, who can step in to keep demand alive? Keynes argued that this is where governments come in. Through public spending on projects like infrastructure, education, or healthcare, governments can inject money into the economy, create jobs, and stimulate demand. This idea forms the basis of Keynesian economics, which has shaped how many countries respond to economic crises. Critics of the paradox of thrift argue that it oversimplifies the complexities of an economy. Some believe that saving, even during a downturn, is ultimately beneficial because it leads to investment and future growth. Others worry that encouraging spending during a recession can lead to excessive debt, both for individuals and governments. These debates highlight the tension between short-term solutions and long-term stability, a challenge that policymakers face in every economic crisis. The paradox of thrift also has a psychological dimension. In uncertain times, fear and anxiety drive people to save more, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. This is why consumer confidence plays such a critical role in economic health. When people feel optimistic about the future, they're more likely to spend, fueling growth. When fear takes over, the economy contracts. The paradox reminds us that economics isn't just about numbers. It's about human behavior and the emotions that drive our decisions. So what can we learn from the paradox of thrift? First, it teaches us to think critically about the relationship between individual choices and collective outcomes. It shows that actions that seem responsible on a personal level can have unintended consequences when scaled up. Second, it highlights the importance of balance. Saving and spending are both essential, but their impact depends on timing and context. And finally, it underscores the interconnectedness of an economy. No one acts in isolation. Our decisions affect others, and their decisions affect us. In a world that often celebrates individual responsibility, the paradox of thrift challenges us to think collectively. It reminds us that the health of an economy depends not just on what we do for ourselves, but on how we contribute to the broader system. And perhaps most importantly, It shows us that economics isn't just about dollars and cents. It's about the choices we make and the values we share as a society. So the next time you're deciding whether to save or spend, remember, it's not just a personal decision. It's part of a much larger story. And that's what makes the paradox of thrift so life-changing. It forces us to see the bigger picture, to think beyond ourselves, and to navigate the delicate balance between individual and collective well-being. Pinocchio Paradox. What happens when Pinocchio says, "My nose will now grow"? Will it grow or will it not? At first glance, this might sound like a clever riddle, but it's actually a deep philosophical and logical puzzle known as the Pinocchio Paradox. It challenges our understanding of truth, lies, and self-reference in a way that is both deceptively simple and profoundly mind-bending. Let's start with Pinocchio's unique situation. He's a wooden puppet brought to life, and his nose grows every time he tells a lie. Now, if Pinocchio says, "My nose will now grow," we're caught in a paradox. If his nose does grow, it means he was telling the truth. But if he was telling the truth, his nose shouldn't grow, because it only grows when he lies. On the other hand, if his nose doesn't grow, it means he was lying. But if he was lying, his nose should grow. No matter how you approach it, Pinocchio's statement creates a logical contradiction that cannot be resolved. This paradox belongs to a family of self-referential puzzles, much like the famous Liar's Paradox, where someone says, "This sentence is false." Both paradoxes highlight the challenges of self-reference, where a statement refers to itself in a way that creates a loop of contradiction. But the Pinocchio Paradox has a unique twist. It ties this logical contradiction to a physical consequence, making it feel more tangible and even more perplexing. To fully appreciate the Pinocchio Paradox, we need to explore what makes it so puzzling. The key lies in the relationship between truth, lies, and cause and effect. In Pinocchio's world, lies have a direct, measurable outcome. His nose grows. This cause and effect relationship seems straightforward until you introduce a self-referential statement like, "My nose will now grow." At that point, the logic breaks down, because the outcome determines the truth of the statement. But the truth of the statement also determines the outcome. It's a feedback loop that defies resolution. What makes the Pinocchio Paradox so fascinating is how it challenges the way we think about language and reality. In our everyday lives, we rely on language to describe the world around us. Statements are either true or false, and we assume there's a clear distinction between the two. But the Pinocchio Paradox shows that this distinction isn't always so clear. When language refers to itself, it can create situations where truth and falsehood blur together, leaving us with no clear answers. Philosophically, the Pinocchio Paradox raises profound questions about the nature of truth and meaning. What does it mean for a statement to be true or false? Can something be both true and false at the same time? These questions have been debated by philosophers for centuries, and the Pinocchio Paradox brings them into sharp focus. It forces us to confront the limits of our understanding and consider the possibility that truth might be more complex than we often assume. The paradox also has implications for logic and mathematics, particularly in the study of formal systems. In the early 20th century, mathematician Kurt Gödel proved that any sufficiently complex formal system contains statements that cannot be proven true or false within the system itself. The Pinocchio Paradox is a playful reminder of this limitation, showing how self-reference can create problems that defy resolution. But the Pinocchio Paradox isn't just an abstract puzzle. It also has real-world relevance. It highlights the challenges of dealing with self-referential systems, which appear in fields ranging from computer science to law. For example, a computer program that tries to analyze its own code can run into loops or contradictions, much like Pinocchio's statement. Similarly, legal systems sometimes create rules that conflict with themselves, leading to situations where it's impossible to determine the correct outcome. The paradox also has a psychological dimension. It reflects the human tendency to overanalyze and second-guess ourselves, especially when faced with complex or contradictory situations. Just as Pinocchio's statement ties itself in knots, Our own thoughts can sometimes create mental loops that are difficult to escape. The paradox serves as a reminder to approach such situations with curiosity and humility, recognizing that not every problem has a clear or simple solution. So, what can we learn from the Pinocchio Paradox? First, it teaches us to question our assumptions about truth, logic, and language. It shows that even the most basic ideas can become profoundly complex when viewed from a new perspective. Second, it challenges us to think critically about self-reference and the limitations of our understanding. And finally, it reminds us that paradoxes aren't just problems to be solved, they're opportunities to explore the mysteries of thought, language, and reality. In the end, the Pinocchio Paradox isn't just about a wooden puppet with a growing nose. It's a doorway into some of the deepest questions about how we make sense of the world. It invites us to embrace complexity, to think beyond the surface, and to see the beauty in the puzzles that make life so endlessly fascinating. So the next time you hear Pinocchio say, "My nose will now grow," remember, it's not just a clever riddle, it's a journey into the very heart of logic and meaning. Paradox of enrichment. Consider you're running a wildlife reserve, and your goal is to protect a predator-prey relationship. You decide to enrich the prey population, make the habitat better, provide more food, ensure their numbers grow. You'd expect this to strengthen the ecosystem, right? But instead, disaster strikes. The predator population skyrockets. They overconsume the prey, and the entire system collapses. This is the paradox of enrichment, a concept from ecology that reveals how attempts to improve a system can unintentionally destabilize it. The paradox, first introduced by ecologist Michael Rosenzweig in 1971, describes how increasing the food supply for prey species can lead to ecological collapse. At its heart, it's a counterintuitive lesson about balance, sustainability, and unintended consequences. While it originates in ecology, its implications extend far beyond the natural world, offering profound insights into economics, human behavior, and the systems we rely on. Here's how the paradox of enrichment works in nature. Imagine a simple predator-prey system: rabbits and foxes. If you introduce more food for the rabbits, lush grass, better conditions, you might expect the rabbit population to thrive, providing a stable and plentiful food source for the foxes. But in reality, the opposite often happens. The rabbits multiply rapidly, and the foxes take advantage of this abundance to increase their numbers as well. The problem is that the foxes grow too numerous, consuming rabbits faster than they can reproduce. Eventually, the rabbit population crashes, and with no food left, the foxes crash too. What started as an effort to strengthen the ecosystem ends in its collapse. The paradox highlights the delicate balance that ecosystems depend on. Predators and prey are locked in a dynamic relationship, each influencing the other's population. By enriching the system beyond its natural equilibrium, we unintentionally create instability. It's a stark reminder that nature doesn't always respond to intervention the way we expect. But the paradox of enrichment isn't just an ecological curiosity. It's a broader metaphor for how well-intentioned efforts can backfire in complex systems. Take economics, for example. Imagine a government trying to stimulate growth by flooding the market with resources, subsidies, or incentives. At first, the economy booms, but soon imbalances emerge: overproduction, inflation, or resource depletion. Just like in an ecosystem, enrichment destabilizes the system. The paradox also appears in human behavior. Consider the idea of overindulgence. If you want to motivate a team or encourage a child, you might think providing more rewards, more praise, more treats would increase their performance. But too much enrichment can lead to complacency or dependency, undermining the very goal you set out to achieve. The lesson here is clear. More isn't always better. Sometimes, striving for improvement without understanding the underlying system can lead to unintended harm. In a world of peace of mind, progress, the paradox of enrichment serves as a cautionary tale. It challenges the assumption that adding more to a system will always make it stronger. Instead, it urges us to think critically about balance, sustainability, and the unintended consequences of intervention. The paradox also raises profound philosophical questions about human interaction with the natural world. In our efforts to control and improve ecosystems, economies, and societies, how often do we disrupt the very systems we're trying to protect? The paradox of enrichment invites us to reflect on our role as stewards of the planet and to consider the limits of our understanding. It reminds us that complexity requires humility, and that even the best intentions can lead to unforeseen outcomes. One way to address the paradox is to focus on resilience rather than enrichment. Instead of trying to maximize a single element of a system, like prey populations or economic output, we can work to maintain the system's overall stability. In ecology, this might mean protecting biodiversity and natural habitats, rather than artificially boosting one species. In human systems, it could mean prioritizing long-term sustainability over short-term gains. The paradox of enrichment also teaches us to embrace uncertainty. Complex systems, whether ecosystems, economies, or societies, are full of interdependencies that we can't always predict. By recognizing these complexities, we can approach problems with a mindset of curiosity and caution, avoiding the pitfalls of overconfidence and oversimplification. Ultimately, the paradox of enrichment isn't just about nature. It's about the interconnectedness of all systems. It shows us that even small changes can have ripple effects, and that our actions, no matter how well-meaning, can produce unintended consequences. It challenges us to think critically, act thoughtfully, and respect the delicate balances that sustain life on Earth. So the next time you're faced with a problem, whether it's ecological, economic, or personal, remember the lesson of the paradox of enrichment. Sometimes the best way to strengthen a system isn't to add more. It's to understand what makes it stable in the first place. Because in the end, true enrichment comes not from overloading a system, but from honoring its complexity and finding harmony within it. Hedonism Paradox. What if the harder you chase happiness, the further away it gets? This is the Hedonism Paradox, a fascinating and counterintuitive concept that challenges our most basic assumptions about pleasure, happiness, and the pursuit of a meaningful life. At its core, the paradox reveals a strange truth. When you make pleasure your ultimate goal, it often eludes you. But why does this happen, and what does it teach us about the nature of happiness? Let's start by unpacking what hedonism means. Hedonism is the philosophical idea that pleasure is the highest good, the ultimate purpose of life. On the surface, it seems logical. After all, who doesn't want to be happy? Whether it's enjoying a delicious meal, listening to beautiful music, or spending time with loved ones, pleasure is a universal human experience. Hedonism suggests that we should maximize these experiences to lead the best possible life. But the hedonism paradox turns this idea on its head. It suggests that the more you focus on pleasure as an end in itself, the harder it becomes to attain. Imagine this. You're at a party, determined to have the best time ever. You carefully plan every detail, what to wear, who to talk to, and even what you'll eat and drink. But as the night goes on, you find yourself constantly evaluating whether you're having fun. You compare your experience to others, worry that you're not doing enough, and end up feeling disappointed. The more you try to force happiness, the less you enjoy yourself. This is the hedonism paradox in action. It's not that pleasure is bad, it's that fixating on it can backfire. The paradox occurs because happiness is often a byproduct of other activities, not something you can achieve directly. When you focus too much on being happy, you become overly self-conscious and start analyzing your feelings. This self-awareness creates pressure and anxiety, making it harder to relax and enjoy the moment. In psychological terms, this is known as the paradoxical effect. By focusing too much on the outcome, happiness, you lose sight of the process, which is where true joy often resides. Philosophers and psychologists have explored this paradox for centuries. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, famously wrote that happiness cannot be pursued. It must ensue as a result of living a meaningful life. Frankl's idea suggests that when we shift our focus away from chasing pleasure and toward engaging in meaningful activities, happiness tends to follow naturally. This aligns with modern research in positive psychology, which shows that people who prioritize purpose and connection over pleasure often report higher levels of life satisfaction. But the hedonism paradox doesn't mean that pleasure is unimportant. It highlights the need for balance. Pleasure is a vital part of life, but it's best experienced indirectly. For example, think about a hobby you love: painting, hiking, or playing music. When you're fully immersed in the activity, you're not thinking about how happy it's making you. You're simply enjoying the experience. Paradoxically, this lack of focus on happiness often leads to deeper and more lasting joy. The paradox also raises important questions about modern society. We live in a culture that constantly encourages us to seek happiness through consumerism, social media, and self-help advice. Advertisements promise that the right car, vacation, or gadget will make us happy. Social media bombards us with curated images of other people's seemingly perfect lives, fueling the idea that happiness is something we should always be chasing. But the hedonism paradox reminds us that this constant pursuit can be self-defeating. It challenges us to rethink what it means to live a fulfilling life and to resist the pressure to measure our worth by how happy we appear to be. So how can we escape the trap of the hedonism paradox? One approach is to focus on intrinsic goals rather than extrinsic ones. Intrinsic goals are things we value for their own sake, like personal growth, relationships, and creativity. Extrinsic goals like money, status, or appearance are often pursued because we think they'll bring us happiness. Research shows that people who prioritize intrinsic goals tend to be happier and more fulfilled because they're not chasing external validation. Another strategy is to cultivate mindfulness, the practice of being fully present in the moment. Mindfulness helps us let go of the constant need to evaluate our experiences and instead allows us to simply enjoy them. By focusing on what we're doing rather than how it makes us feel, we can break free from the self-consciousness that fuels the paradox. The hedonism paradox also invites us to embrace the full range of human emotions. Happiness is just one piece of the puzzle. Life is made up of highs and lows, joy and sorrow, excitement and boredom. By accepting all of these experiences as part of the human condition, we can find a deeper sense of peace and contentment. Paradoxically, when we stop trying so hard to be happy, we often find that happiness sneaks up on us when we least expect it. In the end, the hedonism paradox isn't just a puzzle about pleasure. It's a profound lesson about how to live. It teaches us that happiness isn't something we can grab or hold on to. It's something we discover in the act of living fully and authentically. It reminds us to shift our focus from chasing happiness to creating a life that's rich with meaning, connection, and purpose. So the next time you feel the pressure to be happy, remember the lesson of the hedonism paradox. Let go of the chase, immerse yourself in the moment, and trust that joy will find you in its own time. After all, happiness is less about where you're going and more about how you're traveling. And sometimes the best way to find it is to stop searching and simply live. Value paradox. Why is water, which is essential for life, so cheap, while diamonds, which have no real survival value, are so expensive? This is the value paradox, also known as the diamond water paradox, and it challenges how we think about worth, utility, and the things we value in life. First articulated by Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, this paradox has puzzled thinkers for centuries, revealing surprising truths about human decision-making and the nature of value. To understand the value paradox, let's start with the basics. Water is vital. We need it to drink, to grow food, to clean, to survive. Without water, life as we know it would end. Diamonds, on the other hand, are essentially luxury items. They're used for adornment, industrial tools, and symbolic gestures like engagement rings. But you could live your entire life without ever needing a diamond. So why is it that water, which is essential, is often free or costs very little, while diamonds, which are non-essential, are staggeringly expensive? The paradox lies in the difference between two types of value: utility and exchange value. Utility refers to the usefulness of something, its ability to satisfy a need or want. Water has enormous utility because it's indispensable for life. Exchange value, on the other hand, refers to what something can be traded for in a market, and this is where the paradox emerges. Water has high utility but low exchange value, while diamonds have low utility but high exchange value. The resolution to this paradox lies in a concept called marginal utility, which explains how value is influenced by scarcity and context. Marginal utility is the additional satisfaction or benefit you get from consuming one more unit of something. Think of it this way. If you're stranded in the desert, dying of thirst, a glass of water would be priceless. It could save your life. But if you're at home with unlimited access to clean water, an extra glass has little value because your basic needs are already met. The value of water depends not just on its overall importance, but on how much of it you already have. Diamonds, in contrast, are rare. Their scarcity means that each individual diamond has a high marginal utility. Because they're not easily available, people are willing to pay a premium for them, even though they don't have the life-saving utility of water. The value paradox shows us that value isn't just about necessity. It's about context, availability, and perception. This paradox has profound implications for economics and human behavior. It reveals how markets operate, not on absolute value, but on relative value. People don't pay for how important something is in an abstract sense. They pay for how much it's worth to them in the moment, given their needs and circumstances. This is why luxury goods, which are scarce and desirable, command high prices, even if they have little practical use. The value paradox also challenges us to think critically about the things we prioritize and pursue. It reminds us that value is often subjective, shaped by culture, society, and individual preferences. What one person sees as valuable, another might see as unnecessary. Diamonds, for example, are prized in many cultures as symbols of love, status, and wealth, but their value is largely a social construct. Water, on the other hand, is often taken for granted because of its abundance, even though it's the foundation of life itself. In modern economics, the value paradox has been resolved through the theories of supply and demand. Water is cheap because it's abundant and easy to access in most parts of the world. Diamonds are expensive because they're scarce and difficult to mine, refine, and bring to market. The interplay between supply, demand, and marginal utility creates the price differences we observe. But this resolution doesn't diminish the paradox. It deepens it. It forces us to recognize how easily scarcity and perception can distort our understanding of worth. The value paradox also holds lessons for how we think about the broader economy and global issues. Consider water again. While it may be inexpensive in places with abundant access, in drought-stricken regions or areas with poor infrastructure, clean water can become a highly valuable and even unaffordable resource. The paradox reminds us of the fragility of abundance and the importance of managing resources wisely. On a more philosophical level, the value paradox invites us to reflect on the things we truly value in life. Do we prize the essential but often invisible resources like water, air, and community? Or do we chase the rare and glamorous like diamonds and status symbols at the expense of what really sustains us? It's a question that goes beyond economics, touching on our priorities as individuals and societies. Ultimately, the value paradox is more than a quirky economic puzzle. It's a lens through which we can explore the complexity of human choices, the intricacies of markets, and the values that shape our world. It teaches us that value is never absolute. It's always contextual, dynamic, and deeply tied to how we see ourselves and our place in the world. And perhaps that's the paradox's greatest lesson, that what we value says as much about us as it does about the things we value. Service recovery paradox. Picture this. You go to a restaurant, and your order is completely messed up. Frustrating, right? But then something unexpected happens. The staff apologizes sincerely, replaces your meal with a perfect one, offers you a free dessert, and even gives you a voucher for your next visit. Suddenly, your perception of the restaurant has skyrocketed, and you leave feeling more loyal than if the mistake had never happened. This is the service recovery paradox, a fascinating phenomenon that reveals how a failure, when handled correctly, can actually improve customer satisfaction and loyalty. The Service Recovery Paradox challenges the traditional idea that businesses succeed by avoiding mistakes at all costs. Instead, it suggests that mistakes, when addressed with exceptional recovery efforts, can turn into opportunities to strengthen customer relationships. It's not about the mistake itself. It's about how the business responds. Let's break this down. At its core, the Service Recovery Paradox hinges on two factors: the emotional impact of the mistake and the effectiveness of the recovery effort. When something goes wrong, customers naturally feel disappointed, frustrated, or even angry. But when a company goes above and beyond to fix the issue, it triggers a powerful emotional response. The customer feels valued, respected, and reassured. This emotional recovery can sometimes leave the customer more satisfied than if nothing had gone wrong in the first place. Here's a simple example. Imagine booking a hotel room only to find that your room isn't ready when you arrive. Annoying, right? But now picture this. The hotel staff apologizes profusely, upgrades you to a suite, offers you free room service, and ensures the rest of your stay is flawless. Suddenly, your initial frustration is replaced with gratitude, and you're likely to remember the experience as overwhelmingly positive. In this way, the failure becomes a moment to showcase the company's commitment to excellence. But here's where it gets tricky. The Service Recovery Paradox doesn't mean that businesses should intentionally make mistakes to impress customers with their recovery efforts. That would be a dangerous gamble. First, not all customers respond positively to recovery attempts. Some may still feel frustrated or decide to take their business elsewhere. Second, repeated mistakes, even with stellar recoveries, can erode trust over time. The paradox works best when failures are rare and recovery efforts are exceptional. The paradox also depends on the nature of the mistake and the context in which it occurs. For instance, minor, easily fixable errors, like a delayed order or a billing mistake, are more likely to lead to the Service Recovery Paradox than major failures, like a flight cancellation during a family emergency. In the latter case, even the best recovery effort may not fully repair the emotional damage caused by the failure. So, why does the Service Recovery Paradox work? One reason is that it taps into the psychology of expectations. When something goes wrong, customers' expectations plummet. They anticipate excuses, delays, or indifference. A thoughtful and proactive recovery effort defies these low expectations, creating a sense of surprise and delight. This emotional contrast enhances the customer's perception of the business, often leading to greater loyalty and advocacy. Another reason lies in the concept of reciprocity. When a company makes a genuine effort to fix a mistake, customers often feel a sense of obligation to respond positively. It's human nature. When someone goes out of their way to help us, we tend to appreciate it and want to reciprocate, whether through loyalty, positive reviews, or recommendations. The Service Recovery Paradox also highlights the importance of trust. When a company successfully recovers from a mistake, it demonstrates reliability, accountability, and a willingness to put the customer first. This builds trust, which is the foundation of long-term relationships. Customers feel confident that even if something goes wrong in the future, the company will take care of them. But the paradox isn't a free pass for businesses to be careless. To leverage the power of the Service Recovery Paradox, companies need to approach service failures strategically. First, they must listen and empathize with the customer's experience. A sincere apology is often the first step in rebuilding trust. Second, they need to act quickly and decisively to resolve the issue. Speed and efficiency signal to the customer that their concerns are a priority. Finally, businesses should go above and beyond to make amends, whether through compensation, personalized gestures, or simply exceeding expectations. The paradox also highlights the value of empowering employees to handle service recovery. Frontline staff are often the first point of contact when things go wrong, and their ability to empathize, problem solve, and act decisively can make all the difference. Training employees to respond effectively to service failures is an investment that pays off in customer satisfaction and loyalty. The Service Recovery Paradox isn't just a strategy for businesses. It's a powerful reminder of the human capacity for resilience and growth. It shows that mistakes, while inevitable, don't have to define us. Instead, they can be opportunities to demonstrate integrity, build trust, and strengthen relationships. Whether in business or in life, how we respond to failure matters just as much, if not more, than the failure itself. In the end, the service recovery paradox is more than just a tool for customer retention. It's a profound insight into the nature of human relationships, showing that trust and loyalty are built not by avoiding mistakes, but by handling them with care, empathy, and excellence. So the next time you encounter a service failure, whether as a customer or a business, remember, every mistake is an opportunity to create something better. And that's a paradox worth embracing. Grain of millet paradox. If a single grain of millet falls, does it make a sound? What about a handful of grains, or an entire sack? This simple yet profound question is at the heart of the grain of millet paradox, a thought experiment that challenges our understanding of perception, scale, and the nature of change. It forces us to confront a fascinating problem. How do tiny, seemingly insignificant actions combine to create something noticeable or even monumental? The grain of millet paradox originates from the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno, who was famous for posing questions that defy intuition. The paradox is deceptively simple. A single grain of millet falling to the ground seems too small to make a sound. But if we multiply this action, a handful of grains, or a sack full of them, they clearly produce a sound. So when does the transition happen? At what point does something that appears silent become audible? The paradox forces us to think about how small, incremental changes contribute to larger effects, and where we draw the line between something and nothing. To truly understand the grain of millet paradox, let's unpack its deeper implications. At first glance, the paradox seems like a question about sound and perception, but it's really about continuity and thresholds, how individual parts contribute to a whole. The grain itself represents a small, seemingly insignificant unit, and the sound it makes is so faint it's imperceptible. But when enough grains fall, they collectively create a noise that's undeniable. The paradox highlights the disconnect between individual units and the collective outcome they produce. This idea extends far beyond sound. Think about a pile of sand. If you add one grain at a time, it's hard to say when the collection of grains becomes a pile. Similarly, when you remove grains one by one, at what point does it stop being a pile? The grain of millet paradox belongs to a family of puzzles known as Sorites Paradoxes, which explore how small, incremental changes lead to significant shifts. These paradoxes force us to confront the ambiguity of thresholds and challenge the precision of the categories we use to define the world. Philosophically, the grain of millet paradox raises questions about perception and experience. If a single grain falling doesn't make a sound we can hear, does that mean the sound doesn't exist? This touches on broader debates in epistemology, the study of knowledge, and the role of human perception in defining reality. Are things real only when we perceive them, or do they exist independently of our senses? The paradox nudges us to consider whether small, imperceptible phenomena are just as real as those we can observe. The paradox also has a practical dimension, particularly in the context of cumulative effects. Think about climate change. One person driving a car or using plastic might seem insignificant, but when billions of people do the same, the impact becomes undeniable. The grain of millet paradox reminds us that even the smallest actions can accumulate into something powerful. It's a call to think critically about how individual choices add up and to recognize the collective impact. It's a riddle. It's attributions. The paradox even applies to personal growth and habits. Imagine trying to learn a new skill, like playing the piano or learning a language. Practicing for a single day might not seem to make a difference, but practice consistently over weeks, months, or years, and the results are transformative. The grain of millet paradox teaches us the importance of persistence and patience, showing that small, consistent efforts can lead to profound change. But the paradox isn't just a lesson in accumulation. It's also a reminder of the limits of human perception. Our senses aren't perfect. They have thresholds, below which we fail to notice things. A single grain of millet might make a sound, but it's too faint for us to hear. This raises intriguing questions about what else we might be missing. What phenomena, too small, too slow, or too subtle, exist beyond the range of our senses, shaping the world in ways we can't perceive? In modern science, this idea has fascinating parallels. In quantum mechanics, for example, particles behave in ways that are invisible to the naked eye, but have profound effects on the physical world. In biology, the behavior of a single cell might seem inconsequential, but together, cells form tissues, organs, and entire organisms. The grain of millet paradox reminds us that the world operates on multiple scales, and what seems insignificant at one level can be transformative at another. The paradox also has ethical implications. In a world facing collective challenges like inequality, environmental degradation, and public health crises, it's easy to feel that individual actions don't matter, but the grain of millet paradox reveals the power of accumulation. One act of kindness, one vote, or one effort to reduce waste might feel small, but multiplied by millions, these actions can change the world. The paradox challenges us to reconsider the significance of our choices and to recognize the ripple effects of even the smallest contributions. So what's the takeaway from the grain of millet paradox? First, it teaches us to pay attention to the small things, the grains of millet, the drops of water, the moments of effort that shape our world in profound ways. Second, it reminds us of the interconnectedness of individual actions and collective outcomes. And finally, it encourages us to embrace complexity, recognizing that change often happens not in giant leaps, but in the steady accumulation of tiny steps. The grain of millet paradox isn't just a philosophical puzzle. It's a powerful lens for understanding the world. It challenges us to think critically about perception, thresholds, and the cumulative power of small actions. And perhaps its greatest lesson is this: in a universe where even the faintest sound of a falling grain can add to the symphony of existence, nothing is truly insignificant. Every grain matters, and so do you. Olbers Paradox. Look up at the night sky. It's filled with stars, but there's so much darkness between them. Have you ever wondered why? If the universe is infinite and filled with stars, shouldn't the sky be blazing with light, with no room for darkness? This is Olbers Paradox, a mystery that has puzzled scientists and philosophers for centuries. It's a question that seems simple, but leads to profound insights about the nature of the universe, its age, and its structure. The paradox is named after Heinrich Wilhelm Olbers, a 19th-century German astronomer who popularized the idea, though versions of it had been discussed earlier. At its core, the paradox asks this: if the universe is infinite, eternal, and uniformly filled with stars, then every line of sight should eventually land on the surface of a star. This would mean that the entire night sky should glow as brightly as the surface of the sun. But instead, we see vast stretches of darkness. Why? To understand why this is such a puzzle, imagine standing in a dense forest. No matter which direction you look, your line of sight eventually lands on a tree trunk. In an infinite universe filled with stars, the same logic should apply. Every direction should lead to the surface of a star. Yet the night sky is mostly dark. This contradiction between theory and observation is what makes Olbers' paradox so fascinating. For centuries, scientists proposed different explanations. One idea was that dust and gas in space might block the light from distant stars, preventing it from reaching us. But this doesn't work. Over time, interstellar dust would heat up and begin to glow, filling the sky with light anyway. Another suggestion was that the stars might simply be too far away, with their light dimming as it traveled across vast distances. But in an infinite universe, the number of stars increases without limit, meaning their combined light should overcome any dimming. These early attempts to solve the paradox only deepened the mystery. The breakthrough came in the 20th century, with the discovery that the universe is neither infinite nor eternal in the way previously imagined. Instead, it has a finite age, around 13.8 billion years, and it's expanding. These two facts are key to resolving Olbers' paradox. First, let's consider the universe's age. If the universe is 13.8 billion years old, then light from stars more than 13.8 billion light-years away hasn't had enough time to reach us. The finite age of the universe limits the number of stars we can see, creating gaps of darkness in the sky. In other words, the observable universe is not infinite. It's bounded by the speed of light and the universe's age. Second, the universe's expansion plays a crucial role. As the universe expands, the light from distant stars and galaxies is stretched into longer wavelengths, a phenomenon known as redshift. This stretching moves the light out of the visible spectrum, making it invisible to the human eye. What we perceive as darkness is often light that has shifted into infrared or radio wavelengths. These two insights, the finite age of the universe and its expansion, transform Olbers Paradox from a mystery into a powerful tool for understanding the cosmos. They reveal that the dark night sky is not a flaw in the universe's design, but a window into its history and structure. But the paradox doesn't end there. It also raises deeper philosophical and existential questions. The darkness of the night sky reminds us that the universe is vast, and much of it lies beyond our ability to perceive. It's a humbling realization, forcing us to confront the limits of human knowledge and the scale of the cosmos. Interestingly, what we do see when we look at the night sky is evidence of the universe's origins. The faint glow of the cosmic microwave background radiation, remnants of the Big Bang, fills the sky, even in its darkest parts. This background radiation is a direct result of the universe's finite age and expansion, providing a subtle but profound answer to Olbers' paradox. It's a reminder that the darkness we see isn't empty. It's filled with the story of the universe's birth and evolution. Olbers' paradox also highlights the interconnectedness of science. Solving it required insights from astronomy, physics, and cosmology, showing how different fields come together to answer fundamental questions. It's a testament to the power of human curiosity and our ability to piece together the mysteries of the universe. So what does Olbers' paradox teach us? First, it reminds us to question our assumptions. The idea of an infinite, eternal universe seemed intuitive for centuries, but closer examination revealed its flaws. Second, it shows us the value of looking beyond the surface. The darkness of the night sky isn't just absence, it's evidence of the universe's dynamic history. And finally, it inspires us to keep exploring, to push the boundaries of what we know, and to embrace the wonder of the unknown. In the end, Olbers' paradox is more than just a question about the night sky. It's a journey into the nature of existence itself, challenging us to think deeply about the universe and our place within it. So the next time you look up and see the darkness between the stars, remember, that darkness is not just the absence of light. It's a doorway to understanding the cosmos. Sword and Shield Paradox. Imagine a merchant boasting about his incredible weapons. This sword, he says, is so sharp it can cut through anything. Then he picks up a shield and declares, and this shield is so strong it can block any attack. A curious onlooker raises a hand and asks, "What happens if your sword strikes your shield?" The merchant freezes, realizing the contradiction. This is the Sword and Shield Paradox, also known as the paradox of the irresistible force and the immovable object. It's a thought experiment that seems simple, but reveals profound truths about logic, language, and the limits of absolute claims. The paradox originates from ancient China, where a merchant's exaggerated claims about his unbeatable sword and unbreakable shield were met with the same question: what happens when they meet? The paradox highlights an inherent contradiction. Both claims can't be true at the same time. If the sword can cut through anything, it must pierce the shield. But if the shield can block anything, it must stop the sword. The two absolute qualities cancel each other out, creating an impossible situation. On the surface, this seems like a clever puzzle, but it's more than that. The Sword and Shield Paradox forces us to confront the limitations of absolutes. Absolute claims like, "This sword can cut through anything," or "This shield can block anything," are appealing because they sound definitive and powerful. But when two absolutes collide, they expose the flaws in their logic. The paradox reminds us that the world is rarely as black and white as absolute statements make it seem. One of the most interesting aspects of the sword and shield paradox is how it applies to real-world situations. Think about debates or arguments where two opposing ideas claim to be entirely correct. For example, what happens when the need for absolute security collides with the demand for absolute freedom? Both ideals sound appealing on their own, but when pushed to their extremes, they can't coexist. The paradox shows us the value of nuance and compromise, reminding us that absolutes are often unrealistic in a complex world. The paradox also has implications for logic and reasoning. It exposes the limits of systems that rely on contradictions. In formal logic, statements that contradict themselves are considered invalid or nonsensical. The sword and shield paradox illustrates this by creating a scenario where language breaks down. If a sword can cut through anything and a shield can block anything, the words anything lose their meaning when applied together. The paradox challenges us to think critically about the assumptions and definitions we use in reasoning. Philosophically, the paradox raises questions about the nature of power and limits. What does it mean for something to be truly unstoppable or immovable? In physics, for example, the idea of an irresistible force meeting an immovable object is often used as a metaphor for conflicting principles. But in reality, the concept doesn't make sense within the laws of the universe. If such a force and object existed, one would cancel out the other, showing that even in theory, absolutes have boundaries. The sword and shield paradox also has a psychological dimension. It reflects the human tendency to make exaggerated claims or seek certainty in an uncertain world. Whether it's advertising, politics, or personal beliefs, we often encounter statements that promise absolutes. The paradox teaches us to approach these claims with skepticism, recognizing that the truth is often more complex than it appears. Interestingly, the paradox is closely related to other famous thought experiments, like the liar's paradox, where a statement contradicts itself. This sentence is false. Both paradoxes reveal how language and logic can create situations that defy resolution. They challenge us to question the way we think and communicate, showing that even the most straightforward ideas can lead to profound puzzles. So, what's the solution to the sword and shield paradox? The short answer is that there isn't one, not within the framework of the paradox itself. The contradiction is built into the scenario, making it impossible to resolve without abandoning one of the claims. This lack of resolution is what makes the paradox so powerful. It forces us to confront the limitations of our understanding and embrace the complexity of the world. The sword and shield paradox isn't just a quirky puzzle. It's a tool for critical thinking. It reminds us to question absolutes, seek nuance, and recognize the limits of logic and language. In a world that often values certainty and simplicity, the paradox encourages us to embrace ambiguity and complexity, showing that the most interesting questions are often the ones without clear answers. In the end, the sword and shield paradox isn't about weapons or warriors. It's about the collision of ideas, the nature of contradiction, and the search for truth. It challenges us to think beyond the surface, to question what we take for granted, and to see the world not in absolutes, but in possibilities. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all, that true understanding comes not from resolving paradoxes, but from learning to live with them. Simpsons Paradox. Imagine two treatment options for a life-threatening disease. You're told treatment A has a higher success rate than treatment B, so you confidently choose treatment A. But later, you learn that when you break the data into subgroups, say younger and older patients, treatment B actually performs better in both groups. How can treatment B be better in every subgroup, but treatment A still has a higher overall success rate? This is Simpsons Paradox, a statistical phenomenon that defies intuition and reveals the surprising ways data can mislead us. At its core, Simpsons Paradox occurs when trends that appear in different groups of data disappear, or even reverse when the groups are combined. It's a paradox that challenges our understanding of statistics and forces us to rethink how we interpret information. To make this clearer, let's dive into an example. Imagine a university that is evaluating its admission rates for male and female applicants. The data shows that overall, a higher percentage of male applicants were admitted compared to female applicants, suggesting potential gender bias. But when you break the data down by departments, you discover that each department actually admitted a higher percentage of female applicants than male applicants. How is this possible? The answer lies in the composition of the data. In this scenario, the paradox occurs because women apply disproportionately to highly competitive departments with low admission rates, while men applied more often to less competitive departments with higher admission rates. When the data is aggregated, these differences skew the overall results, creating the illusion of bias against women, even though no such bias exists within individual departments. This paradox is a reminder of the dangers of oversimplifying data. It highlights the importance of context and shows how combining or aggregating data can mask important details. In the example of the university admissions, the overall numbers told one story, but the departmental breakdown told a very different one. Simpsons Paradox teaches us that the way we group and analyze data can fundamentally change the conclusions we draw. The implications of Simpsons Paradox go far beyond hypothetical examples. It appears in real-world scenarios across a wide range of fields, from medicine and social science to sports and public policy. For instance, in clinical trials, a treatment might seem effective when the results are aggregated but turn out to be less effective or even harmful when analyzed for specific subgroups such as age or gender. In politics, aggregated voting data can suggest trends that don't hold true within individual demographics. Even in business, marketing campaigns or product evaluations can be misleading if the data isn't analyzed carefully. The paradox also raises deeper questions about causality and decision-making. When faced with contradictory patterns in data, how do we determine which perspective is correct? Should we focus on the overall trend, or should we prioritize the subgroup analysis? The answer often depends on the context and the questions we're trying to answer. Simpsons Paradox reminds us that data doesn't speak for itself. It requires interpretation, and that interpretation can be influenced by how the data is presented and understood. One of the most important lessons of Simpsons Paradox is the need for critical thinking and careful analysis. In a world increasingly driven by data, it's easy to take numbers at face value, especially when they confirm our assumptions or fit a compelling narrative. But Simpsons Paradox shows that data can be more complex than it appears, and that even seemingly straightforward statistics can be deceptive. This paradox also has profound implications for how we communicate data. Misleading interpretations of data can have serious consequences, from flawed medical decisions to misguided policies. Understanding Simpsons Paradox can help us become more discerning consumers of information, better equipped to ask the right questions and challenge misleading conclusions. Simpsons Paradox also reminds us of the importance of transparency in data analysis. When presenting data, it's essential to provide enough context and detail to allow others to understand how the data was collected, grouped, and analyzed. Aggregated results can be useful, but they should always be accompanied by a breakdown of subgroups to avoid oversimplification and misinterpretation. Philosophically, Simpsons Paradox challenges us to think about the nature of truth and perception. It reveals how different perspectives on the same data can lead to conflicting conclusions, forcing us to grapple with the idea that truth is often more nuanced than we'd like to believe. It's a paradox that invites us to embrace complexity and to question our assumptions about the way the world works. In the end, Simpsons Paradox isn't just a quirk of statistics. It's a powerful reminder of the importance of context, critical thinking, and curiosity. It teaches us to look beyond the surface, to dig deeper into the data, and to approach information with a healthy dose of skepticism. And in a world where data increasingly shapes our decisions, that lesson might just be one of the most life-changing paradoxes of all. Friendship Paradox. Why do your friends seem to have more friends than you? It's not just in your head. It's a real phenomenon called the Friendship Paradox. This counterintuitive idea suggests that, on average, your friends are more popular than you are. How is that possible? And more importantly, what does it reveal about the way we interact, connect, and compare ourselves to others. Let's start with the math behind the paradox. Imagine a social network, not the kind on your phone, but the web of connections that links people together. Some individuals have only a few friends, while others are social butterflies, connected to dozens or even hundreds of people. The friendship paradox emerges because people with lots of friends are more likely to be your friends. Why? Think of it this way. If someone has 100 friends, they have 100 chances to be connected to you, while someone with only 2 friends has just 2 chances. In a network, the popular people act as hubs, disproportionately influencing the average number of friends your friends have. This mathematical quirk means that when you compare yourself to your friends, you're more likely to be comparing yourself to someone with above-average popularity. And because of this bias, your friends, on average, will seem to have more connections than you do. The paradox isn't just about self-perception, it's a reflection of how networks operate, from social circles to the internet. But the friendship paradox doesn't stop at numbers. It has profound psychological and social implications, especially in an age dominated by social media. When we scroll through platforms like Instagram or Facebook, we often see the highlights of other people's lives, vacations, parties, achievements, shared by our most connected friends. This creates the illusion that everyone else is more popular, more successful, or more interesting than we are. The friendship paradox explains why this illusion is so pervasive. We're naturally more exposed to the lives of the most connected individuals, amplifying the sense of comparison. This can have a significant impact on mental health. Research shows that social comparison is a key driver of anxiety, envy, and even depression. The friendship paradox reminds us that these comparisons are often based on a distorted perspective. Your friends might seem more connected, but that's largely because of how networks work, not because you're less valuable or less connected yourself. Interestingly, the friendship paradox isn't just a curiosity. It has practical applications. In public health, for example, it's used to identify influential individuals in social networks. During a disease outbreak, health officials might target vaccination campaigns or public health messages to people who are more connected, as they're more likely to influence others. By leveraging the paradox, we can improve the spread of helpful information and curb the spread of harmful misinformation or diseases. The paradox also sheds light on the dynamics of influence and inequality in networks. In any network, whether it's a group of friends, a professional community, or a social media platform, connections aren't distributed evenly. A small number of individuals often hold a disproportionate amount of influence. The friendship paradox reveals how this inequality shapes our perceptions, interactions, and even opportunities. But perhaps the most profound lesson of the friendship paradox is what it teaches us about perspective. It reminds us that our view of the world is always partial, shaped by the connections and relationships we have. Just as your friends seem more popular, your perception of other aspects of life, success, happiness, or wealth might be skewed by the people you're exposed to. The paradox invites us to question these perceptions, to recognize their limitations, and to focus on what truly matters. The friendship paradox isn't just about numbers, it's about understanding how we relate to others and how networks influence our lives. It challenges us to rethink the way we compare ourselves to others, to see beyond the surface of popularity, and to appreciate the unique connections we have. Because in the end, it's not about how many friends you have. It's about the depth, meaning, and quality of those relationships. And no paradox can take that away from you. Tolerance Paradox. Can a tolerant society remain tolerant if it tolerates intolerance? This is the Tolerance Paradox, a profound and troubling dilemma first introduced by philosopher Karl Popper. It challenges the very foundation of what it means to live in an open, free society. At its core is a simple yet uncomfortable question. How far should we go in accepting opposing viewpoints, especially when those viewpoints threaten the very fabric of tolerance itself? Let's imagine a society built on the principle of tolerance. People are free to express their beliefs, live how they want, and engage in open dialogue. But then an intolerant ideology begins to emerge, one that rejects the values of tolerance and actively works to suppress others' freedoms. What should the tolerant society do? If it tolerates the intolerant, it risks being overrun by those who reject tolerance altogether. But if it doesn't tolerate the intolerant, hasn't it abandoned its own principle of tolerance? This is the heart of the paradox. Tolerance is often seen as an absolute good, but the tolerance paradox reveals its limits. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that tolerance, when taken to an extreme, can become self-destructive. Popper introduced this idea in his 1945 book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. He argued that unlimited tolerance leads to the erosion of tolerance itself. If a society allows intolerant ideologies to take root and spread unchecked, those ideologies can eventually undermine the freedoms that made the society tolerant in the first place. Popper's solution was clear but controversial. A tolerant society must reserve the right to be intolerant toward intolerance. On the surface, this might sound contradictory. After all, how can a society committed to tolerance justify being intolerant? But Popper's argument isn't about suppressing disagreement or silencing opposing viewpoints. It's about drawing a line when those viewpoints actively threaten the rights and safety of others. The goal isn't to eliminate conflict or disagreement, but to protect the very conditions that make a tolerant society possible. The tolerance paradox isn't just a philosophical puzzle. It has real-world implications. Consider freedom of speech, one of the cornerstones of a tolerant society. Should this freedom extend to those who use it to spread hate speech, incite violence, or advocate for the suppression of others' freedoms? Some argue that even the most offensive ideas should be allowed in the name of free expression, trusting that open debate will expose and discredit harmful views. Others contend that allowing such speech can create an environment where intolerance thrives, ultimately putting vulnerable groups at risk. History offers plenty of examples where the tolerance paradox has played out in dramatic ways. In the early 20th century, many democratic nations tolerated the rise of authoritarian movements, believing they could coexist with democratic values. But in cases like Nazi Germany, that tolerance allowed intolerant ideologies to gain power and dismantle democracy from within. These historical lessons show that unchecked tolerance can have devastating consequences. But where should we draw the line? This is where the tolerance paradox becomes especially tricky. Not all forms of intolerance are equally dangerous, and not all disagreements threaten the fabric of society. Disagreeing with someone's political views or cultural practices isn't the same as advocating for their suppression. The challenge lies in distinguishing between harmful intolerance that needs to be addressed and healthy conflict that should be encouraged. Critics of Popper's idea often raise concerns about who gets to decide what counts as intolerant. They argue that labeling certain ideas or groups as intolerant can be subjective and prone to abuse. A government or group in power could misuse this principle to silence dissent under the guise of protecting tolerance. This highlights the delicate balance a society must strike between protecting itself and avoiding authoritarianism. The tolerance paradox also raises important questions about human psychology and group dynamics. Intolerance often arises from fear, ignorance, or a sense of threat. Addressing these underlying causes through education, dialogue, and empathy can be more effective than simply suppressing intolerant ideas. But even these approaches have limits, especially when dealing with ideologies that are fundamentally opposed to dialogue or compromise. In today's polarized world, the tolerance paradox feels more relevant than ever. We see debates over free speech, censorship, and the boundaries of tolerance play out daily, from social media platforms to political arenas. As we navigate these challenges, the paradox reminds us that tolerance isn't just about accepting differences. It's about actively protecting the principles that make coexistence possible. So, what can we learn from the tolerance paradox? First, it teaches us that tolerance has limits, and those limits are necessary to preserve the values we hold dear. Second, it challenges us to think critically about how we respond to intolerance, whether through open dialogue, legal protections, or in extreme cases, restrictions. And finally, it reminds us that a tolerant society is not a passive one. It requires vigilance, courage, and a willingness to confront difficult questions about freedom, fairness, and justice. The tolerance paradox isn't just a problem to be solved. It's a reflection of the complexities of living in a diverse and open society. It forces us to grapple with the tension between our ideals and the realities of human behavior. And perhaps its greatest lesson is that tolerance isn't a static principle. It's a dynamic process, one that requires constant effort to uphold. In the end, the paradox doesn't weaken the idea of tolerance. It strengthens it by showing us that true tolerance is not about accepting everything, but about standing firm in defense of what matters most. Crocodile Paradox. Let's suppose your child has been snatched by a crocodile. You're standing at the edge of a river, your heart pounding, your breath shallow. The crocodile looks at you with its cold, unblinking eyes and says, "I will return your child if, and only if, you can correctly guess what I will do next." At this moment, your world freezes. You realize this isn't just a life or death situation, it's a logical trap. No matter what you answer, you're stepping into a paradox. This dilemma has baffled philosophers and thinkers for centuries. It's not just a puzzle about a predator and its prey. It's a profound exploration of knowledge, logic, and the limits of certainty. Let's carefully walk through this tangled web of reasoning. You have two possible answers to give the crocodile. Consider the first scenario. In this scenario, you predict that the crocodile will return your child. If the crocodile plans to return your child, your prediction is correct, and the crocodile fulfills its promise. Everything aligns, and your child is safe. But if the crocodile plans to keep your child, your prediction is wrong, and the crocodile isn't bound to return the child. In this scenario, everything remains logically consistent because the outcome depends entirely on whether your prediction aligns with the crocodile's intention. The real paradox emerges in the second scenario. In this scenario, you predict that the crocodile will not return your child. If the crocodile plans to keep the child, your prediction is correct. But now the crocodile is forced to return the child because your prediction was accurate. This creates a contradiction because the crocodile cannot both keep the child and honor its promise to return them when your prediction is correct. On the other hand, if the crocodile plans to return the child, your prediction is wrong, and by the terms of the deal, the crocodile should not have returned the child in the first place. In either case, the crocodile is trapped in a logical contradiction. So what's really going on here? The Crocodile Paradox is a classic example of a self-referential paradox where a statement refers to itself in a way that creates an impossible situation. It's similar to the famous Liar's Paradox, where someone says, "This statement is false. If the statement is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true." The Crocodile Paradox operates on this same slippery logic, where the crocodile's promise collapses under its own weight. But beyond the logical puzzle, the Crocodile Paradox also raises deeper philosophical questions. At its core, it's about the nature of promises, truth, and trust. If a promise creates a scenario where it cannot logically be kept, is it really a promise at all? And if a situation is built on contradictory rules, can any outcome truly be fair or just? In a way, the paradox reflects real-world situations where agreements are made under flawed premises. Think about legal contracts filled with loopholes, political promises built on conflicting conditions, or even personal dilemmas where every choice seems to backfire. The Crocodile Paradox isn't just a brain teaser, it's a mirror reflecting the complexity and imperfection of the promises we make and the expectations we set. But let's not forget the crocodile in this story. The paradox also reveals something about power and control. The crocodile isn't just a passive participant in this riddle, it's the architect of the trap. By setting the rules in a way that guarantees contradiction, the crocodile ensures that no answer can fully satisfy the agreement. In a sense, it represents authority structures or systems where the rules are intentionally rigged to maintain control, even in the face of logic and fairness. So, can this paradox ever be solved? Philosophers have debated this question for centuries, and the general consensus is no. The paradox isn't meant to have a resolution because it's not about finding an answer, it's about understanding the problem. It's a thought experiment designed to expose the limits of language, logic, and our assumptions about fairness and promises. But perhaps the real lesson of the Crocodile Paradox is this: not every question has an answer. Not every problem can be untangled through pure reasoning. And sometimes the power lies not in solving the puzzle, but in recognizing the trap it creates. So, if you ever find yourself face to face with a crocodile offering a deal that seems impossible to fulfill, remember this paradox. Sometimes the game is rigged from the start, and the only winning move is to recognize the paradox for what it is: a cleverly constructed trap hiding behind the illusion of choice. Twin paradox. Time travel may sound like science fiction, but there's a paradox that brings it shockingly close to reality. The twin paradox, a thought experiment from Einstein's theory of relativity, challenges our very understanding of time, space, and how they interact. It's not just a fascinating riddle. It's a glimpse into the mind-bending world of modern physics, where time can stretch, shrink, and behave in ways that defy intuition. The twin paradox begins with a simple premise: two identical twins. One twin stays on Earth, living their everyday life, while the other boards a spacecraft that travels close to the speed of light. After completing their journey through space and returning to Earth, something extraordinary happens. The traveling twin is younger than the one who stayed behind. How is this possible? They're twins, after all. They started with the same age. Shouldn't they have experienced time in the same way? The answer lies in Einstein's theory of special relativity, which describes how time and space are interconnected. One of the key principles of relativity is that time is not absolute. Instead, it's relative to the observer's motion. This means that the faster you move, especially at speeds approaching the speed of light, the slower time passes for you compared to someone who isn't moving as fast. This phenomenon is known as time dilation, and it's at the heart of the twin paradox. For the twin aboard the spacecraft, time moves more slowly because of their incredible speed. To them, the journey might feel like only a few years have passed. But for the twin on Earth, where time moves at its usual pace, decades could have gone by. When the traveling twin returns, they find their sibling significantly older, while they have barely aged. This isn't just a theoretical idea. It's a real effect that has been observed in experiments involving particles traveling at high speeds. At first glance, the paradox seems to raise a symmetry problem. If motion is relative, can't the traveling twin argue that it was their sibling who was moving while they stayed still? Why should the traveling twin age more slowly? The resolution to this lies in the fact that the two twins experience different paths through space-time. The traveling twin undergoes acceleration and deceleration as they leave Earth, turn around, and return. This breaks the symmetry of the situation. In contrast, the twin on Earth remains in a single, inertial frame of reference, experiencing no such changes in motion. The twin paradox isn't just a thought experiment, it has practical implications. In fact, time dilation is a measurable effect. For example, GPS satellites orbiting Earth experience time dilation because of their high speeds and the weaker gravity at their altitude. To ensure that GPS systems work accurately, scientists have to account for this effect, adjusting the satellite clocks so they stay in sync with clocks on Earth. Without this adjustment, your GPS navigation would quickly become unreliable. The paradox also challenges our everyday assumptions about time. We tend to think of time as a constant, ticking away at the same rate for everyone, everywhere. But the twin paradox reveals that time is far more flexible than we imagine. It can stretch and compress depending on your speed and location in the universe. This isn't just an abstract idea. It's a reality that has been confirmed by countless experiments and observations. The implications of the twin paradox extend beyond physics, touching on deep philosophical questions about time and existence. What does it mean for two people to experience time differently? How does relativity reshape our understanding of aging, identity, and memory? And if time itself can behave so strangely, what other surprises might the universe hold? One of the most fascinating aspects of the twin paradox is how it bridges the gap between science fiction and science fact. Concepts like time travel, interstellar exploration, and life at near light speeds often seem fantastical. But the paradox shows us that these ideas are grounded in the fundamental laws of physics. It's not a question of whether time dilation is real. It's a question of how we might one day use it to explore the cosmos. Yet the paradox also serves as a humbling reminder of the limits of human intuition. Our brains evolved to understand a world where speeds are slow, distances are short, and time feels constant. The twin paradox pushes us beyond these everyday experiences, forcing us to think in terms of a universe that operates on entirely different scales. It's a testament to the power of human curiosity and imagination, allowing us to glimpse a reality that lies far beyond our senses. So, what does the twin paradox teach us? It's more than just a quirk of physics. It's a profound insight into the nature of time and space. It challenges us to rethink what we know about reality, to question our assumptions, and to embrace the strange and wondrous truths of the universe. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that even the most familiar concepts, like time, can hold mysteries that are waiting to be discovered. Grand Hotel Paradox. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms. Every single room is occupied, yet somehow the hotel can still accommodate new guests. How is this possible? This is the Grand Hotel Paradox, a thought experiment introduced by German mathematician David Hilbert, and it's one of the most mind-bending ways to understand infinity. It challenges our intuitive understanding of numbers and space, forcing us to rethink what infinity really means. Picture the Grand Hotel. Every room has a number, 1, 2, 3, and so on, and all the rooms are filled with guests. A traveler arrives at the front desk and asks for a room. The receptionist, without hesitation, smiles and says, "Of course, we have space." But how? If every room is occupied, where will the new guest stay? Here's the trick. The receptionist asks every current guest to move to the next room. The person in room 1 moves to room 2, the person in room 2 moves to room 3, and so on. This frees up room 1, which is now available for the new guest. Remarkably, even though the hotel was full, it made space without turning anyone away. That's the strange logic of infinity. There's always room for more. But the paradox doesn't stop there. What if a bus arrives, carrying an infinite number of new guests? Surely, even an infinite hotel couldn't handle that, right? Yet the Grand Hotel can. This time, the receptionist asks each current guest to move to a room number that's double their current one. The guest in room 1 moves to room 2. The guest in room 2 moves to room 4. The guest in room 3 moves to room 6, and so on. This leaves all the odd-numbered rooms, an infinite number of them, empty and ready for the new arrivals. The hotel accommodates infinity within infinity, a concept that feels impossible but works perfectly within the rules of mathematics. So, what does this paradox teach us? First, it reveals that infinity is not just a really large number. It's a completely different kind of quantity. In our everyday lives, numbers are finite and behave predictably. But infinity breaks those rules. In the Grand Hotel, full doesn't mean no more room, and adding to infinity doesn't make it bigger. It's already infinite. The paradox also highlights the difference between potential infinity and actual infinity. Potential infinity is the idea of a process that could go on forever, like counting numbers. Actual infinity, on the other hand, refers to a completed infinite set, like the total number of rooms in the Grand Hotel. Hilbert's thought experiment forces us to confront the strangeness of actual infinity, where our normal understanding of addition, subtraction, and space no longer applies. But there's more. The Grand Hotel Paradox also has profound implications for our understanding of the universe. In physics, for example, infinity appears in theories about the cosmos, black holes, and even the nature of time. Hilbert's paradox reminds us that infinity isn't just a mathematical curiosity, it's a concept that shapes how we understand reality itself. Yet the paradox also raises philosophical questions. If infinity behaves so differently from finite numbers, can we ever truly comprehend it? The Grand Hotel feels absurd because it conflicts with our everyday intuition. It shows us that the human mind struggles to grasp infinity, even though It's a central idea in math and science. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Grand Hotel Paradox is how it applies to modern mathematics. The paradox is rooted in set theory, a branch of math that explores collections of objects. Mathematicians like Georg Cantor, who pioneered the study of infinity, showed that there are different sizes of infinity. The set of whole numbers, for example, is infinite, but it's smaller than the set of real numbers, which includes fractions and decimals. The Grand Hotel illustrates one of these infinities, known as countable infinity, where you can list all the elements in a sequence, like the rooms in the hotel. The paradox even connects to practical problems, like computer science. Algorithms that deal with infinite processes, like searching through massive data sets, often rely on principles similar to the Grand Hotel. By breaking infinite problems into manageable steps, we can apply the logic of Hilbert's Hotel to solve challenges in technology and beyond. But perhaps the most important lesson of the Grand Hotel Paradox is how it challenges us to think differently. Infinity is a concept that defies common sense, but it's also a gateway to deeper understanding. It forces us to question our assumptions and explore ideas that stretch the limits of imagination. The Grand Hotel Paradox may seem like a quirky mathematical puzzle, but it's a profound exploration of the nature of infinity. It shows us that the universe and even reality itself is far stranger and more complex than we often realize. And in the process, it reminds us that some questions don't have simple answers, but they can still open the door to endless possibilities. Paradox of the Raven. If someone told you that looking at a green apple could prove that all ravens are black, you'd probably think they were joking. But that's exactly what the paradox of the raven suggests, and it's one of the most mind-bending puzzles in logic and philosophy. How can something as unrelated as the color of an apple tell us anything about ravens? This paradox forces us to question not only how we think about evidence, but also how we understand the way knowledge works. The paradox of the raven, also known as Hempel's paradox, was introduced by the German philosopher Carl Gustav Hempel in the 1940s. It starts with a simple statement: all ravens are black. In logic, this is equivalent to saying, if something is not black, then it is not a raven. These two statements mean the same thing. They're logically interchangeable. But here's where things get strange. If you want to prove that all ravens are black, you might think the best way to do that is to observe lots of black ravens. And that's true. Each black raven you see adds evidence to the claim. But by the same logic, observing something that is not black and is not a raven, like a green apple, also counts as evidence for the statement, all ravens are black. Why? Because a green apple fits the idea that if something is not black, it's not a raven. So, according to the rules of logic, spotting a green apple provides just as much evidence for the claim as spotting a black raven. This is the paradox of the raven. It challenges our intuition by suggesting that evidence for a statement can come from observations that seem completely unrelated. At first, this idea feels absurd. How can looking at an apple tell us anything about ravens? The paradox arises because of the way logical equivalence works. If the statement, all ravens are black, is true, then so is its contrapositive. If something is not black, then it is not a raven. Any observation that fits the contrapositive, like a green apple, logically supports the original statement. But our intuition rebels against this. We feel that looking at a raven tells us more about ravens than looking at an apple does. The paradox reveals a disconnect between formal logic and human intuition. In logic, all evidence that supports a statement is equally valid, no matter how it's obtained. But in practice, we assign different weights to different types of evidence. Seeing a black raven feels like strong evidence for the claim, all ravens are black, while seeing a green apple feels irrelevant, even though both are logically equivalent. To make sense of this, let's dig deeper into the nature of evidence. When we evaluate evidence in the real world, we're not just thinking about logical equivalence. We're also considering how informative or specific the evidence is. A black raven is directly related to the claim, so it feels highly relevant. A green apple, on the other hand, doesn't seem to tell us much about ravens, even if it technically supports the statement. This highlights a key limitation of formal logic. While it provides a framework for reasoning, it doesn't always align with how we process information or assign significance to evidence.